Hello, tis I, everyone's favourite pastry-based life form. Uh, I'm a little bit late today. Um, I totally forgot before stream that I hadn't taken my medicine for this afternoon, which, slightly important. Uh, not like it's important or anything. I uh, I didn't stream. I think it was Friday last week because I think I was unwell. I can't remember. Uh, but from Saturday till this morning, I've had the worst migraine. Uh, Turns out the medicine that I'm on gives you potassium deficiency sometimes, and uh, magnesium deficiency, and calcium deficiency, and I just decided to do that at the weekend, and I didn't realize that was what's going on until yesterday when I was like, I'm just gonna eat cereal and milk and bananas, and today so much better, and hopefully it'll go away soon. Today we're gonna read chapter 10 onwards of the story. I know we read chapter 10 at the end of the last one, if you were here then, but we're gonna start then because I think I was half asleep by that point and my voice was going. So we're gonna start with 10 as a kind of reminder and see where we go from there. If you weren't here before and you haven't seen the warning, it's pinned in the chat. If you can't see chat for whatever reason, I'll read it for you now. It says content warning: blood, mild gore, bad people doing bad stuff, medical negligence, ableism, psychological horror. That's not an extensive list. There was a more extensive list last stream, so maybe uh go check that. The beginning of that where you'll see the message pop up. Um but it's nothing where I'd have to put like an actual Twitch stream warning for gore and stuff. It's just if you're sensitive to that, it might be too much for you, so don't feel like you have to watch this if you don't want to. And that might make you unwell or upset. I'm gonna get the chapter up because I totally didn't do that because I was looking at the content warning that I wrote in the book, and uh, it's not as extensive. Ooh, sorry, I just smacked my head off the microphone. Which always feels like I'm hitting you for some reason. I don't know why. Here we have an explanation of the story, also known as something that I can't remember the name of. Which isn't that joyful. we just, I'm sorry. Like I've been asleep most of the past week, or reading a terrible, extremely triggering book with a bad ending. So, it's a great thing to read while having a migraine. Something that makes you feel worse. Let me find the 10 because Wattpad really loves to wait to load for you. Chapter 10. Welcome again. The now reawakened system once again ran through its intro speech, seemingly oblivious to the fact that he'd already heard it all. Dax was, however, glad, as he felt he hadn't been able to take in any of the information provided in it due to being semi-conscious and chained up underwater. Thinking that you may be drowning at the bottom of a lake, chained to a rock, wasn't exactly the prime listening conditions. At least now he was dry and not in imminent danger of passing on. Welcome, forgot to do System's voice. Don't we love that? System is the only one that gets a voice because my acting level is not good enough. Welcome, customer 1949621854 or 451837. Love that I mix those numbers up. Says System in its robotic voice. Another puff of confetti was released from its golden orb, and most of that fell directly into the lake water, where it started dissolving rapidly. The display was significantly more impressive than the previous submerged experience. Dax marvelled at the shiny pieces of paper as they slowly fell towards the water, and wondered just how much confetti was stored inside this orb thing. The water the water when you're too northern to speak. Anyway, the water solubility is a nice environmentally friendly feature, Dax thought, as he brushed some stray pieces out of his hair. At least System is conscious of its environmental impact. Though it definitely would have been funnier if rice had exploded out of it, as if they were a wedding that didn't care about birds. Author's note. Apparently, upon research, rice isn't actually dangerous to birds, but becomes a fall danger to humans, and that's why people don't want it. So, don't throw it to stop birds exploding, but refrain so your elderly aunt doesn't end up with a broken hip and in hospital on your wedding day. Currently, the system had manifested its being as a rather much larger golden orb than it had been earlier. This time it was roughly the size of a large navel orange, and it was still glowing softly. Dax's stomach growled again, but was interrupted by the continuance of the AI's speech. Congratulations, Dax Moonfield. You have been identified as a person who died before your destined time. You have been judged to qualify for our Second Chance program. Second chances. This was the part of the speech that had freaked him out the most the first time, and even now it was a little disturbing. You have been assigned to the body of someone who died with an unfinished destiny. The system continued swaying gently from left to right in what seemed to be an attempt to soothe him. It wasn't working. Couldn't you just put them back in their own body? Dax asked, genuinely confused about what was going on. Why put someone else into their body when it seemed like you had the chance to just stuff the actual person back in there? The thought of just stuffing someone's soul back into their body was pretty amusing, and Dax was sure that the vast majority of people would appreciate not dying enough to get over how weird the sensation would be. We like to spice things up around here. I'm sure you can guess from the sheer state of the body you are currently residing in that the death of the previous occupant was a little on the distressing side. There's no way that he would be mentally ready enough to return at this point. Oops. That was meant to be System. Here we go again. We like to spice things up around here. I'm sure you can guess from the sheer state of the body you are currently residing in that the death of the previous occupant was a little on the distressing side. There is no way that he would be mentally ready enough to return at this point, System replied. Its attempt to make a joke landed rather flat due to the recipient's own distress. Can't believe I did that. Spice things up, Dax cried out in indignation. The sound of his voice echoed off the walls of the cave, and a small amount of dust rained down from the ceiling. Spice things up. Spice things up. Spice things up. Messing about with people's bodies and souls had to be, at the very least, highly unethical. If there was a way of making formal complaints about systems attitude, Dax would be willing to write one right now. This job can get boring, even for an AI, System sounded like it was sighing and rather bored of having to answer his questions. Dax looked up at the floating orb and sighed himself. What am I supposed to do? He asked, nervously tucking hair behind his ear. This long hair was going to take some getting used to. Your responsibility is to live the life of Deitos, the god of wheat, until the timeline important events are finished, after which you are free to live how you wish to. It felt less of an answer than he had hoped to receive. If it was an answer, it was one that only bred more questions in its wake. A god? Dax asked again, attempting once more to actually understand what was going on. Yes, the god of wheat, as in the god of wheat. As the god of wheat, you will gain access to upgrades you will be able to unlock the more you act like your predecessor. The system explained as Dax threw gravel into the lake in frustration. Think of it like a game where you get rewarded for making in-character choices. Now an AI was telling him how to gamify his life. Are you going to tell me anything about him so that I actually know how to behave? Dax asked, watching the ripples he had created spreading out over the surface of the water. No. Then how am I meant to not be or see out of character for people who don't know that particular shortening? The system cannot provide you with a walkthrough. It flashed orange momentarily and produced a warning screen in the same colour, featuring the phrase, warning, OOC. It looked like there was going to be consequences for not acting like a stranger whose body he was possessing. Hopefully Dax wouldn't run into anyone that knew Dethos for a while, whilst he figured things out. Unfortunately, that wasn't how things were going to pan out. Mini theatre. Arthur, could you explain this to him in a less helpful way? System, you are the one that wrote the dialogue. Arthur, yes, but that was during NaNoWriMo. I can't be held accountable for what I write during the fever dream that is handwriting a novel at 2 a.m. in neon yellow gel pen. System, could you have used literally any other colour? Arthur, I wanted the manuscript to be rainbow coloured. It's aesthetically pleasing and helps my sleep deprived brain to see what I have actually written and that I've actually written something and it's not a hallucination. System. ... It's also another Remo again. That's November, for anyone that doesn't know. National Novel Writing Month, in which this travesty of a story was born. I think it's only the third year that I've written, and like I've done it since 2013, and I've won quite a few times. But I think this is only the third or fourth time that I've written like an actual novel. In original fiction. I used to do a lot of fan fiction during NaNoWriMo, but that's because I have a Harry Potter fic that's 350k words, and like the story hasn't even begun yet, really. Which we love, just to realize how asexual you are because you're writing a romance in which you keep putting off the romance. Like 45 Chapters in 350,000 words. No kiss. No kiss has happened. I think they've hugged once. Which I think only infuriated people more. I love that. I think it just got to the point where it just amused me how annoyed people were because people just wouldn't read the tags on this fic. And I would just be like, why are you annoyed about this when I told you this was going to happen in the tags? But I suppose that's why Dead Dove don't exists because people just don't read tags. And you can be like, hey, bad stuff. You can't complain because I told you. If you have Dead Dove. Chapter 11. The Other Bell. The courtyard of Dethos's palace was filled with deities speed-walking their way through the entrance of the formal gardens. Nervous murmurs ran through the gathered mass as they tried to hurry towards the source of the sound now echoing through the entirety of the city, whilst trying to remain composed. This was a big event, and if you weren't there, well, you weren't there. Dethos's formal gardens were filled with yet even more camellia bushes, each one in full flower and carefully trimmed into delicately tapering teardrop shapes. Beneath and between them, at random intervals, stalks interspersed with wildflowers grew. It might be a formal garden, but it was the god of wheat's formal garden. You could see his trace everywhere you looked. Shaped like a labyrinth. I still don't know whether it's labyrinth or labyrinth, how you meant to pronounce it. I'm going to go with labyrinth. So I feel like that's easier to say. Shaped like a labyrinth, the path twisted in various directions before it led them all to another gravel-filled courtyard, where Elgaldia was already standing. As the path was narrow and the flowers so delicate, a big bottleneck happened that took some time to pass. Despite their rush and impatience to know what was going on, the various residents of Heavenly's... I'm so sorry for yawning directly into the mic then. It's 7 p.m. I have the sleep schedule of a grandma. Also, still recovering from that weird thing that happened to me this week. We were talking about a bottleneck. Despite their rush and impatience to know what was going on, the various residents of Heavenly City found themselves tiptoeing around the plants, desperately in order to not damage anything and incur the wrath of the god of war. Once everyone had made their way to the centre, the space was pretty cramped. It was hard to see anything unless you were close to the middle, or freakishly tall. Members of the war department who had run in after their boss were attempting to keep within eyesight of him, whilst commiserating that they were even more squashed now than they had been in the office. At least there had been places to sit down there, even if that place had been someone else's lap. The ringing of the bell had drawn more than just the notice of Elgaldia and his juniors. The goddess of healing was here, and she was probably the busiest resident in the entire city. You could even hear people lost in the labyrinth, complaining about not being able to see. It was easy to get knocked off of your feet as the crowd moved, each person jostling for a better view. There was an alarmed shout from somewhere on the left, and as one, they all turned to see what had happened. Lying in a thorny bush was a clumsy god who hadn't been able to remain standing. Everyone glared at him for distracting them from what was happening, as he pulled out thorns that had become embedded in the skin of his hands. And forearm. I'm just yawning so much. I think that's just a feature of streams now, it's me yawning. In the centre of the huddle was the god of war, standing over what looked like a glass bird bath. Sunlight shining down on the glass bowl cast many tiny flecks of rainbow light on all those who had gathered there. Above it, suspended from a wrought iron arbour, covered in pink, white, and red clematis flowers, were delicate wrought iron. Delicate and wrought just fully merged into one word there. A delicate wrought iron wind chime. Dangling from the wind chime were several metal chimes and a delicate crystal bell. Luckily, Elgaldi was staring at it in... Currently, God, I can't even read my own book. Currently, Elgaldi was staring at it in disbelief as it swung gently from side to side, emitting the tolling sound that had brought them all here. The note, though light and cheery sounding, symbolized something much more important than a passing gentle breeze. As he stood staring at it in silent wonder, the ringing grew louder, and the time in between peals reduced. Now it sounded like someone was frantically ringing it to raise an alarm. Deities who had previously been scrambling and shoving one another to get a better view stood as still as statues. It had never done this before. In the entire time the wind chime had hung here, it had never rang, even once, never mind so energetically. A golden light began to shine from the bell down into the glass bird bath. I nearly said bird glass. Lying beneath it. The rainbows of light that had been refracting from it strengthened, forming spiderweb silk-like rays. When the light hit the marble arches at all four entrances to the courtyard, the light enclosed them in a glowing protective seal. Beneath their feet and above their heads, light slowly wove itself into a pair of giant glowing discs. Each strand of light being pulled into them, constructing intricate, delicate patterns filled with complex runes. They were dazzling in their brightness, even to divine eyes. It was a protection seal that had been made when the palace had been built many thousands of years ago. Protection seals served two main functions: to protect the dwelling from the damage of time and battle, and to alert when the owner was in danger. Originally, it had only been constructed to emit the light of the seal. The bell had been a later addition. For uncountable years, it had remained dormant, so dormant that many of the gods, goddesses, and deities present had been certain that the protection seal had dissipated upon Dethos's death. Elgaldia, though, had not been able to be assured of this. All uses of godly power, every piece of magic, every fulfilled prayer left behind a trace of the person who had performed it. Static things like protection seals ran from a pooled resource of power like a battery pack, or they were directly connected to the deity's own power. Dethos had made this seal. Elgaldia had been there when it was made, which meant that he knew it was directly connected to the wheat god, and that meant if it was working, he was still alive. He could feel its power every time that he came to kneel in the outer courtyard to seek atonement. Power that had been so weak Elgaldia had worried he was hallucinating again. Its presence had given him the hope to keep going, to keep believing, to keep living, even though it had begun to feel increasingly that those were the hopes of a madman. Dethos wasn't dead. The words became a gossamer thread that held him together. Now the seal had reactivated, and the power that was pumping through the seal, holding it open, and stretching and strengthening, the power of its luminescence was like nothing he had ever seen. Elgaldia looked around, half expecting to see some new deity come waltzing in to lay claim to the plot of land this all stood on. But there was no such person. The palace and its grounds were filled only with the confused whispers of the gathered crowd. There was only one thing the reactivation of the protection seal could mean. In the lands of the living walked the wheat god. He had been so desperately looking and waiting for signs of. Elgaldia reached out a hand to touch the bell. The hand, normally firmly holding a weapon, was now shaking uncontrollably. He withdrew it almost immediately, feeling the eyes of everyone gathered here upon him. Fear had suddenly risen in the back of his throat that he would break it with his big hands, so unused to dealing with delicate things. Touching it felt disrespectful. He had already destroyed enough. On the bell's final clang, it emitted a wave of energy that passed through all of the gathered deities, knocking some of the weaker ones clean off their feet. Hair was mussed, hats blew off and over the wall, and even some of the most powerful divine beings found themselves wincing from its effects. Whilst they were busy writing things and collecting all the hats from flowering bushes and a decorative fish pond, The god of war was already running at top speed to the palace at the summit of the hill. It was the largest and fanciest of all the palaces. Some time had passed by before anyone noticed that he was gone. Such was the commotion. The gathered mass of deities started to thin once there was nothing new to see, and gossip started to break out that would no doubt filter out to everyone in the city in 6 hours. I nearly said 2. I imagine these deities very gossip. Heaven loves a gossip. I imagine it would have probably only taken 2. As the War Department deities searched for their boss, one almost stood on an embroidered handkerchief that had fallen on the ground. It was blue with somewhat clumsy golden embroidery. She picked it up and a lock of hair fell out onto the gravel path. She sighed and collected it back up again, gently wrapping it in a handkerchief to ensure that it wasn't lost. You didn't keep a lock of hair like this without having a strong emotional attachment to where it had come from. After glancing around carefully to see if anyone was looking for the lost keepsake, she took a closer look at the material in her hands. It was then that she saw Elgaldia's name embroidered on one corner in crooked letters. The gold thread had been pulled too tightly in some places and too loosely in others when the embroiderer had sewn the letters, and they all sloped towards the corner of the fabric. Fuck. She tucked it gently into the armour that she was still wearing from the ceremony earlier in the day and gathered the others together. They snaked their way through the crowd before squeezing through the crush at the gate, following the pointed fingers of silent deities who knew who they were chasing. Main theatre. Mini theatre. Bell. Bing bong. Deities. Such a deep meaning and such a beautiful sound. Dax. What an obvious ploy by the author. Arthur. Shh, it's 11 p.m. right now, and I like crystal bells, okay? I kept having weird bell-based dreams till I wrote these 2 bells to the story. They're everyone else's problem now. Bell. Bing bong. End of chapter 11. Forgetting what chapter on. Will be a running theme. Tonight. Stretch time. Everyone stretch. Everyone take a sip of a liquid. A sip of a portable liquid. And stretch. And now, continue. Chapter 12. Lunchtime. A considerable chunk of time was dedicated by the system to dumping a concerning amount of information on Dax, so much so that he began to feel a little woozy. Adapting to his current situation and the world he was currently living in was not something that could be done so quickly. Every time he felt like he was actually getting a grasp on what was happening, something else would happen and it would send him spiraling. It was a lot to take in. I'm a god? He asked incredulously. Dax's voice wavered as he took a step towards the orb and almost lost his balance on a rather slippery rock. There was a patch of red algae forming on it that he hadn't seen in his shock. I thought we just... It's system again. I thought we just talked about this. Technically, you are a fertility deity with a speciality in wheat and wheat byproducts, System replied in its monotone robotic voice. It seemed like it was annoyed at his inability to just go with the flow of the conversation, interrupting the AI with endless questions. Dax found himself blushing. What? Isn't that the realm of big-breasted goddesses? He asked. Everything he'd learned in school about old fertility goddesses was that they were goddesses. Goddesses with big boobs and long hair and big hips who walked around the countryside naked, occasionally holding a basket of fruit or a baby. He might not describe himself as a never nude, but he didn't fancy the prospect of being so publicly without clothes. Also, his current body was lacking some seemingly important assets in this line of work. System hovered silently, staring at him with its non-eyes, a glowing ball of judgment. Deities exist and have the appearance that they do because of the beliefs of their believers and what they believe about them. It explained, trying to get into his head that in the heavenly realm, everything you did and everything you were was down to the people who prayed to you. Makes sense, I guess, Dax replied, shifting his weight from where he was kneeling at the gravel shore to sitting with his legs crossed. He was tired already, his legs were beginning to shake, and it seemed like this conversation wasn't going to end quickly. Dax didn't want to faint mid-conversation, he was already embarrassed enough. As stated previously, there are several power upgrades that you can purchase with the points you can earn from acting in character as Dethos, the god of wheat. The system reminded him, hoping to get back on track with its explanation and entice his gamer brain with the prospect of gamifying his life. How am I meant to pass as this person I know nothing about? Dax asked bluntly, pointing out what he thought to be a pretty glaring flaw in this plan. The system responded snappily, "That's your problem to deal with," as it bobbed up and down angrily. "What happens if I don't do this?" Dax asked, staring at the glowing orb, starting to think that this was some sort of fever dream he was having. Maybe he would suddenly wake up and find himself in a hospital somewhere after being in a keyboard electric shock-induced coma. Unfortunately, pinching himself really hard on his left forearm did not cause this to happen. For now, at least, this situation was real, and he was going to have to live by system's rules for at least a while. It bounced up and down in the air in what looked like an increasingly annoyed manner before saying, "We swap you out with another lucky customer, and then you're for real dead this time." Certainly sounded like a threat to Dax, who was only just starting to find his feet in his new body, and rather unprofessional. Who would program something like this to say, "and then you're for real dead this time"? Welcome in anyone new. Please read the pinned comment. For everyone's safety and emotional well-being. Coming to terms with your own death and all the things that you have left behind was a long process, and he didn't have any time to do that. Even less time now that he was being told that they would replace him if he couldn't impersonate a god that he had no knowledge of. A god the system wouldn't even help him to impersonate, other than to tell him when he was being OOC and punishing him for that. Dax swallowed hard and decided that it was probably for the best to change the subject, at least for his current mental health. There was a more pressing situation to deal with right now. His stomach growled so loudly they could both hear a faint echo reverberating off the walls of the cave. "I'm really hungry. Can you tell me if there's anything edible in this cave?" Hopefully, system would actually be useful to him here because his stomach was pretty impatient for food. Scanning for edible materials. System emitted several beeping noises as a scanning laser came out and swept through the cave. The abundant local fungi are edible. Dax was shocked. Really? They kind of looked like the results of some radioactive accident. He was also amazed that the system had managed to do something that didn't take hours or days to complete. It seemed like it was actually going to be useful to him now, and that was a comforting thought. No radioactive components were found during the search for edible substances, System replied. This place didn't feel quite so lonely anymore. System just hovered silently as Dax's stomach rumbled. He decided to just take the risk and munch on a mysterious fungi recommended to him by an AI. What was the worst thing that could happen? There was a small crack in the rock that made up the floor of the cave, relatively near where he was sitting. It was filled with loose gravel of various sizes, and from that gravel grew some of the glowing mushrooms. Their soft purple light was softer than the large ones that towered over him. Each stalk was thin and spindly and topped with a small cap that was yet to open up and show its gills. Dax heaved himself up off the ground. "Oh, 1 minute, I have cramp." Ow. Love that. Dax heaved himself up off the ground and walked over to where they were all clumped together. This time he took more careful steps in order to not slip as the rock was covered with a thick, wet covering of red algae. Algae. Both algae and algae. His fist closed around a small bunch of the fungi. Oh, fungi. And he gently wrested them free from the gravel substrate where they were growing. It was a lot easier to do that than Dax had thought it would be. The mushrooms were only held into the ground by thin threads. For some reason, he had imagined that they would be a lot thicker and more like roots. Now that he had them, he began to wonder if there was anything that he could use to cook them back at the temple. At the very least, he didn't have to worry about starting a fire because the temple's fire was still burning bright and warm in the outer room. The thought of chewing on a raw mushroom was kind of nauseating, and even though he was starting to feel nauseous from how much his stomach was cramping, he wasn't prepared to do that yet. Mushrooms had a bad enough texture as it was when they were cooked. Dax had never been much of a fan of them at the best of times, unless there was some strong tasting sauce on them, and there wasn't any chili sauce to save his taste buds now. He rooted around in the temple, opening every cupboard and feeling every shelf before finding a long, sharp fire fork that he washed and used to skewer the mushroom clump before roasting it in the fire. It took longer to cook than he had expected, and it tasted fine. Nothing to write home about, but not horrific. Definitely needs seasoning. There was dust on the shelves in the outer room. He'd disturbed it in his search earlier, and as he sat chewing on what was left of the now cooked fungi, he could see the motes raining down in the light of the fire. This place really needs a spring cleaning. Now that his stomach was full and no longer threatening him to throw up bile, Dax decided to give the small space a freshen up. Cleaning would help pass some time and alleviate the boredom that was starting to creep in. Maybe he would be able to find some sort of tool that he could use to get out of here. He hadn't exactly scoured the place for escape tools during his search for the firepork, and it was highly likely that he could have missed something important. He raised his arms to sweep the thick of the dust off the topmost shelf with an old but clean-looking rag that he had found, but that proved to be a pretty stupid idea. Dax had forgotten in his hungry state just how badly injured this body was, the pain of hunger having overpowered the pain of his still healing wounds. Most of the wounds that he had been able to see so far were starting to knit together and scab, but the more serious ones weren't adverse to the idea of opening up again at any given moment. For one of them, this moment had been all it took to open anew. Dax was distracted from the pain and the blood that he had running down his side by the severely faded painting rolled up at the back of his shelf. His hand had just brushed up against. He pulled it out gently. The paper was very old, and it was glued to a piece of fabric at either end of which was a wooden pole. It unrolled as Dax held it to reveal what seemed to be a painting of a man. It was almost impossible to tell whether it was a painting of a person at all. Time had faded the colours, and the black line art was so thin and delicate it was hard to decipher. Rather than a painting, it now resembled something that could only be called the ghost of a painting. There was a nail above the temple's offering table he had seen before during his various sweeps of the room. Obviously that was where the mysterious painting had originally hung, for there was nowhere else where there would be space to do so. Dax fixed the string on the back of the painting and replaced it on the nail, where it hung in the dancing light from the fire. Better a damaged picture than no picture. This is the temple of the god of healing, System informed them after scanning the painting. That's nice, I guess. I'll have to thank him for all his help if we meet, Dax replied. He was happy to know who he should thank for letting him use the shelter. A short prayer was said in thanks, and he placed a rather large piece of mushroom into the fire as an offering to the rather hospitable god. He might have a temple in an extremely weird place, but that was something Dax wasn't going to hold against him. Right now, that place was keeping him warm and fed. A long moment of silence passed between the system and Dax. It was punctuated only by the gentle cracking of the temple fire. They both watched the mushrooms he had given in offering cook, char, and then disintegrate into ashes. Wow, my bitrate looks bad right now. If I suddenly drop, I will be back as soon as I can. But it really looks like trash right now. Ooh, 700 chopped frames. We love that. Ba, ba, ba. Plot progression will occur in 12 hours. Please feel free to rest or participate in leisure activities. Until then, System proclaimed before powering down, its light slowly fading into nothingness. Dax sighed. He would have liked to ask more questions, and the phrase plot progression will occur in 12 hours sounded acutely ominous. He wasn't even sure that he wanted to know what that was about. Hopefully, it was something that was going to get going. Hopefully, it was something that was going to get him out of this cave. Even though he had food, now that he knew nibbling on a glowing mushroom wasn't going to hurt him, he couldn't stay here forever. The wound he had reopened on his back really started to make itself known. Dax reached a hand out to touch it, and winced when he felt the stretching pulling at it again. His hand felt the sticky blood that was starting to congeal, and decided that it was probably best to rebandage it before he went to sleep. He freaked out a little once he withdrew the hand, and the blood coating it was not the red colour he was so accustomed to, but instead a bright gold. Mini theatre. Dax. Gold blood? System. Well, you are a god. Did you think they needed hemoglobin? Dax. I guess my gluten intolerance is also cured now? System. You're the god of wheat and wheat byproducts, so I should hope so. It would be pretty ironic otherwise. Most of the offerings you're going to receive are in the form of bread. Dax. I can eat bread that I don't literally have to sell one of my kidneys to be able to afford. Ah! End of chapter 12. I had to think for a second. Yes, 12. I'm going to take a short drink break. We're literally 3 chapters in right now. We've been here 48 minutes. And I've just found some Rick Rack ribbon in my pocket that I forgot that I put there. I've been sewing Christmas presents, and it's going. Not going well, but it's going. You wouldn't believe how hard it is to make a bag. I'm making my sister an advent calendar that's made up of little bags that she can put stuff in. Oh, good bit right again. She can put stuff in because she's gluten intolerant and dairy. She can't drink dairy. And I think egg. Maybe not egg. Who knows? IBS problems, everyone. She can't have an ordinary, just like coward one that has the chocolate in it. And there is a brand who she can eat the chocolate, but she doesn't like it enough to buy an advent calendar. So I'm making her one. It's reusable, that she can put whatever she likes in it, and then she can have an advent calendar again. Aren't I a great sis? Chapter 30. Confrontation, long in the making. The Emperor of Heaven had both a massive, beautiful throne room door. I've no. Oh, I need to edit the sentence. Wait a minute. Let me write it down. Because this does not make sense. I have an entire box of pens that I just bought because I have a stationery issue. And NaNoWriMo's, pardon me, coming. Chapter 13. Chapter 13. That's one. What is this? I think what I was trying to say is that he had a beautiful door and then the god of war kicked it in. I don't know what the both means, so we'll move on. The Emperor of Heaven had a massive and beautiful throne room door until the god of war kicked it in. Boom. A sound like that of a battering ram hitting the drawbridge of a castle emanated through the air. It reverberated with the force of the god's foot before the huge wooden door with its intricate fish carvings splintered into thousands of pieces. Wood slivers, gold, and shattered oyster shells rained down on the stairs, descending into the throne room. The debris was blown so far inside that a golden seashell even landed at the feet of the Emperor's throne. Several members of the court who had not fled or dove for cover during the explosion were left standing in a room that no longer had a door. Several were unable to stop their mouths from falling open as they stared at the space where it had once been hanging until it had incurred the wrath of Elgaldia. It took a good 15 seconds before the guards rushed out to get and or grab them. No one had ever even tried to do that before. Occasionally, someone would come and kick the outer door of the palace, but never had someone actually done any lasting damage to the structure. Once they were closer to the pissed off god of war, the guards could see that he was holding a flaming sword in his left hand. The braver ones drew their own heavenly weapons and once again reached out to grab him. Elgaldia braced himself, fully ready to fight his way up to the throne if he needed to. The ringing of the bell was enough reason to throw all logic aside. Thoughts of Dethos were enough to abandon almost anything for. His hands were shaking. Apart from the deities of death, everyone had told Elgaldia that Dethos was dead. Hello, Realaroo. How's your day? How's it going? What are you up to? I am so tired. You hear me yawning? That's why I've been sick as a dog this past week. So hi, Adam. You are late. You're 3 chapters late. But I don't hold that against you. It's fine. All we found out is that someone isn't dead. Big crystal bell go ring ring. And purple glowing mushrooms are actually edible and not the result of a nuclear issue. Oh, thank you. That's so nice. Reading streams are like, here's where Raven attempts to use words. Look how wrong it can go. Uh, as Adam will know, we used to have a hangout where I'd read books to Adam, and I don't know what McNutt goes by anymore. I forgot. And I really screwed some words up in there. This is my own book and I can't even read it. So, you know, person with communication issues sometimes read not good, even though read good on in head. As I was saying, I read a book, a full novel for the first time in a really long time. Because usually I read from I am Adam. This is the issue. This is the problem and the issue, and you know, everyone has red flags. NaNoWriMo is a red flag of mine. It's just like I'm non-functional in November. Don't expect anything from me. No, we just hit 150k, and I am at chapter 48 and like ready to be published. Uh, and apparently I need a beta reader because we just got to this chapter and like the first sentence makes no sense at all. I know, and there's 121. I might be 122 because I did add an extra chapter somehow. Like I wrote like 4,000 words extra in a chapter, and I was like, "This is too long. We cannot have one 8,000 words." And I didn't want to change the number of chapters, so I was just like, "This is chapter 46A and chapter 47. No, 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 no. This is chapter 46B." Makes sense, right? Just change all convention of numbers. My biggest problem is forgetting what I capitalize. Oh. Well, Helen said if I ever get around to writing my cottagecore lesbian witch murder mystery story, that she would 10,000% wanna be my better reader for that, which I'm really grateful for. But also, my brain doesn't want to do that. I've forgotten. Oop, sorry. I keep my mic placement is like right up in my face. I keep moving my head and like smacking it off the microphone. And every time I do it, I feel like I've just like proper headbutted you. Because it's my old mic used to be like above my head. This one has to be like right in your face because of it's really good, but it has like a place where you have to talk into it. And I'm not used to like I'm used to being able to flail around. Uh, blah 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 blah. Let's go back a little bit. It took a good 15 seconds before the guards rushed out to grab him. No one had even tried to do this before. Occasionally, someone would come and kick the outer door of the palace, but never had someone actually done any lasting damage to the structure. Once they were closer to the pissed off god of war, the guards could see that he was holding a flaming sword in his left hand. The braver ones drew their own heavenly weapons and once again reached out to grab him. Elgaldia braced himself, fully ready to fight his way up to the throne if he needed to. The ringing of the bell was enough reason to throw all logic aside. Thoughts of Dethos were enough to abandon almost anything for. His hands were shaking. Apart from the deities of death, everyone had told Elgaldia that the Dethos was dead. The powers still remaining in the protection seal in Dethos's courtyard had reassured him that wasn't so, but the god of war had faced 4,000 years with questions that no one would answer. They had been so adamant. uh, sorry. After last there. Chapter 1 also has a direct quote from Adam that I stole because it was amusing and fit the storyline. You know, it's literally like an Adam rant against people in DVD. It's like just walk straight into the killer. That's the intelligent thing to do. Something like that. It's like, have you even played this game? How do you have this rank when you're so terrible at the game? They had told him that it was his grief, that it was the weight of his sin that made him so sure Dethos was alive. Why did I pause in the middle of that sentence? No one knows. But, but he had seen Dethos's lifetimer. There had still been sand in it. Of all the voices, that. It was more funny than an asshole. behavior at the time. They were really being trashed, the game. But they had like 3,000 hours in it, and you were like, what? How can you play this much of the game and be terrible? Uh, yeah, I'll send you uh, your royalty check to you in the post. There's been sand in it of all the voices of that of all the voices, that of the Emperor of Heaven was the loudest. He'd never been put in this position before. All this time he'd trusted the imperial family, and yet they had lied to him. Not only had they'd lied about something that was so catastrophic. Killing Dethos and horrifically wounding him were both unforgivable, but they were also two entirely different things. The sword held in his calloused hands shook as he attempted to swallow past the lump in his throat. Mouth dry, eyes moist, and teeth clenched, he steadied his grip, just as Elgaldia raised his sword and dropped into a more defensible position, ready to clash swords with guards. The Emperor stood up from his throne and commanded, "Let him in, and lower your weapons." Elgaldia took several steadying breaths as he glared up at the throne. A thin sheen of sweat covered his face, and his knuckles cracked from the sheer strength of his grip on the sword. It took a while, but he was able to sheath his sword and rein in enough of his anger now that he was no longer being actively prevented from his approach. To see killing everyone in his path was not likely to end up in him getting the answers he desperately needed. Just kill everyone who knows the answers of the thing that you want. That'll totally get you there. The god of war approached the throne, and the god, now standing in front of it. His steps echoed in the silence of the marble-filled chamber. Each tap of his shoes on the polished floor sounded like the footsteps of a giant. The ministers were all hiding behind various marble columns that held up the ceiling, too afraid to intervene, but too curious to flee. The door does have a handle, you know. I'd appreciate it if you would make use of that, the Emperor said, returning languidly to his seat on the throne. He drew around himself a red velvet robe, trying to make it look like having his door obliterated by an incredibly emotionally unstable and particularly dangerous god of war was something that happened every Tuesday. No, nothing unusual at all. I am still in control of the situation, was the thought plastered all over the bemused smile he flashed Elgaldi as he languidly crossed his legs. The chatter of the members of the court who were in attendance grew in volume. If the Emperor was still happy to crack a few jokes, then things couldn't be all that bad. If there was something that heavenly was that heavenly? If there was something that heavenly deities loved, it was gossiping in large rooms about other people. One would think that you had finally lost your mind. The sentence was filled with restrained anger that only people who had had their door kicked in could have. It wasn't hard to notice the twitching of his long, shapely eyebrows and the clenching of his jaw. For reference, I feel like he has Branduel's eyebrows from the Hobbit movies. Uh, he's just got them Elf King eyebrows. I don't know where I was going with that. A blue glow surrounded the fragments of what had once been a door, and they started to float in a cloud of shell, gall, and wood. Pieces bumped into one another as they searched for the ones they had previously been joined to before snapping together as if pulled by magnets. Soon in the place where there had once been a door, there was a door once more, though you could still faintly see the lines where the pieces met. Like a shattered teacup glued back together, it looked like it would always bear the scars of this event. For what purpose do we have the pleasure of your presence during this emergency meeting of the court? The Emperor asked. Someone had recovered enough from the events to bring him a cup of coffee, and he was now sipping on it, adding to his cultivated air of not being fazed. Despite still being several meters away, Elgaldi could still see the slight tremble in the Emperor's hand as he placed the cup back down onto its saucer. He wasn't fooled. Where is Dethos's body? Elgaldius seethed. The Emperor of the Heavenly Realm choked on a mouthful of coffee he had yet to swallow. It wasn't just the sword that was on fire now. Elgaldia's entire arm was wreathed in flame. Any further discussion was interrupted by the groaning of the newly repaired door, and the various members of the War Department piled in through it. They were breathless after sprinting all the way here from Dethos's labyrinth, trying to intercept Elgaldia before this happened. Clinking armor, exhausted panting, and several awkward coughs filled the silence of the Heavenly Emperor's annoyed aurora. At least this intrusion At least his intrusion had left his door intact. He heavenly contemplated buying a revolving door, but no doubt the god of war would have destroyed that too. Dethos's body is being kept in a secure location, the Emperor stated, after regaining his composure. You know what? I don't understand the need to destroy my door and walk in here armed in order to be told that once more. Seeing that their boss was currently too enraged to explain the mysterious ringing of the bell, the War Department members did their best to. We are aware it's why, the Empress said, yawning, as he was interrupted by another member of the palace staff rushing to replace his empty coffee cup with freshly filled one. The rest of his sentence was cut off by a growl from Elgaldia, whose sword flames were now scorching the stone beneath his feet. It's why, he continued, making note to make the god of war pay for the cleaning and potential replacement of his throne room flooring. He had been looking for an excuse to redecorate. Black marble, so out of fashion. We will be sending someone to investigate. The bell was set up to warn us of any movement in the place his body is being kept in stasis. Elgaldi's fierce. Suddenly becomes Scottish. Elgaldi's face betrayed his thought. I'm sorry, but you're not the first person I would think to deal with this situation. The junior sucked in a deep breath. This was a touchy subject? The Empress walked across the room from the corner where she had been attempting to talk to staff about state affairs, obviously annoyed at what was going on between her husband and the god of war. Everyone's gaze was drawn to her at her movement and the heavily sequined dress she was wearing that sparkled in the light of Elgaldia's increasing rage. Only Mother Willow and Omdum, the god of healing, know where Dethos's manifestation is, she stated, taking a seat in her own throne, not far from that of her husband's. The staff members of both the Palace of the Emperor of Heaven and the War Department started to whisper amongst themselves about this. No one knew where Dethos's body was. Sure, there was a statue right here in the palace, but after the battle, not even Elgaldia had been told where he had been buried. Which, sucks big time, and is a pretty shady thing to do. Something that only solidified the god's feelings of worthlessness for many years. Being told you weren't even worthy to visit the grave did not help. It was another scar on a heart already heavily wounded by the events of the Battle of Wind-Blown Tears. The whispered conversations were immediately ended when Mother Willow walked into the room. She touched the door and all the tiny cracks disappeared. The door was now one solid piece of wood again. Do we not have door guards? The Emperor complained. At this point, I might as well live in a field. Beside him, the Empress rolled her eyes before smiling warmly at the new visitor and turning her gaze back to Elgaldia. I was trying to prevent a Balmud Eglaroll situation from happening for everyone's mental well-being, Mother Willow said. She reached out a hand and deeply wrinkled and gnarled with age, and gently placed it on the taller god's back. He clenched his jaw, fixing his glare on someone new. Who? One of the younger members present asked a friendly-looking neighbour, but it was overheard by the ancient goddess. Before pretty much any of you existed, when you were but a twinkle in the eye of your first believer, there was a god of the demon realm that kept the dead body of his teacher like an incredibly macabre body pillow. A body pillow that he wouldn't be parted from, one he slept with every night for years, Mother Willow explained. People winced. It was best not to let your mind wander when thinking about that one particular tale. And for reference, that is a reference to Scum Villain, Self-Saving System, which is my favourite book and inspired this book. because we gotta get at least one reference in there, and that is a truly wild thing that happened in the book. People winced. I guess spoilers, but like I don't think anyone in here reads Dan May though. Is Chinese BL books for anyone who doesn't know. But if you do, 100% comment about it because I need someone to talk with me about that book. People winced. It was best not to let your mind wander while when thinking about that one particular tale. You see why the Emperor said, I am not deranged enough to disrespect him in such a way. Elgaldia ground out. He only wanted to have a grave to visit. He only wanted to be able to talk to Deitos, to apologise, to kneel before it, and beg for forgiveness, to know he wasn't in pain anymore. You seem to have forgotten just how much of a handful you were in those early days, the Emperor said as he descended the stairs from the throne and stood before the gathered members of Elgaldia's staff. Since the crystal bell had hung, not just once, but loudly and clearly, it seems that the god of wheat will walk amongst us once more. Now I have to figure out what Rue's comment is in regards to. Is it in regards to keeping your teacher's dead body as a body pillow several years, or hasn't read Danme, won't read Dan read hasn't read Danme, won't read Danme. Because both of those wild. If he's still the god of wheat, the Empress added, now visibly annoyed by her husband who couldn't keep his mouth shut. Mother Willow cleared her throat, annoyed with pretty much everyone present. Good for you. It's great when it's great, and it's bad when it's bad. Uh, the fact that I've read several and there has been I've read 5 like of the physical books that have been translated. And in 4 of those 5 books, there's been a quote unquote coffin scene where it's pretty much, I feel like it's a Dan May trope. Instead of there's only one bed, what will we do? It's dangerous things are happening. Oh look, there's a coffin. Why there's only one coffin? Gotta climb in it and have some realizations about ourselves. There's an ad about to happen, apparently. So just so you know. Yeah, there was some realizations had. To reference Scum Villain. Sometimes you realise the severity and the seriousness of the heavenly pillar. Sometimes you gotta row a coffin through a sea filled with sea monsters. Uh, there's another one. There's another 2 that I can't think of right now. But like those 2, wild, truly wild. And the fact that they're by the same author who loves to destroy us emotionally. Uh, you know, we love that about her. One day we will talk about them, and I will pass on the trauma to you. Mother Willow cleared her throat, annoyed with pretty much everyone present. If you would like to go, I will take you, but you have to prepare yourself for potential adverse reactions to your presence, she said, taking Elgaldia's hand, which was not currently on fire, in her own wooden ones, because wood, fire, not a great mixture. It's almost as bad as the coffin coffin tropes and waiting for someone you think is dead. That's the tropes, my friend. And although this story doesn't have coffin tropes, it does have waiting for someone you think is dead. Uh, and I think I'm meaner than her on that point. Uh, do, 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 do. Adverse reactions, woodness. The god of war twitched, the flames on his sword began flickering. To those observing, he seemed to be vibrating from the energy he was using to restrain his emotions. He'd seen Devas's body on the battlefield, what had been done to it, what he had done to it, done to it. Oh, God. Okay, we're in the loopy part of stream now. Uh, what had been done to it, what he had done to it, still haunted his dreams. Damage that wasn't survivable even for a war god, and yet there had been something this whole time. Something telling him he wasn't dead. Maybe it was all the people who run the world of the dead people were telling you it's not dead. Or the sand timer that you saw that told you he wasn't dead, but then everyone in heaven has been telling you that he's dead, and I think they're just pessimistic. People had tried to convince him that he was stuck in the denial phase of grief. No matter the time that passed, the feeling lingered. Ilgaldian knew deep in his heart that he had been lied to, but having them acknowledge that was just as destructive as it was relieving. It seemed that he really had been lied to. Dethos really was alive. After everything, I just needed to see that he's not dead. Hello, you survived the outbreak, and we have returned. You will never know what happened in there, but I didn't read. The warning it tells you is very bad. It wasn't very accurate at all. Dun, 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 we're talking about after everything. I just really need to see that he's not dead. Elgaldia choked out. His eyes were filled to the brim with tears that threatened to spill at any moment. Umdum, the god of healing, was was yet another unannounced visitor to the throne room, but he at least softly closed the door behind him as he entered, the only deity in the heavenly realm with manners. He was never dead, Omdum said, making his way through the room to stand shoulder to shoulder with Mother Willow. But he certainly was as close as any deity could be to utter destruction for a very long time. Mother Willow stared. She was still looking at the god of war. His sword flames had not only charred the surface of the marble tile, but were now etching a round hole into it. The stone glowed faintly from the heat as it returned to lava. I was granted by the deities of death the permission to view his timer in the underworld, and there was only a single grain of sand left in it. We had to ensure that absolutely nothing disturbed him, whilst his divine soul tried to heal his corporeal manifestation. Ilgaldia sighed once again, taking several deep breaths to calm down. Being angry with them for keeping this from him was something that he could figure out later. What was the most important thing right now was making sure that Dethos was actually okay. Even if he was angry with him and never wanted to see him again, Ilgaldia just wanted to see him. See the light back in his eyes again, and not the lifeless looking, crumpled and blood soaked body of the god of wheat as he had last seen him. If Mother Willow and Omdum are willing to take you, then I'm happy to sign off on this, as long as you leave the sword behind. The Emperor gestured to the holy weapon that was now merely emitting steam and rapidly cooling but still smoking flooring tiles. He was going to get his new flooring after all. The god of war handed his sword over to the juniors with a look that screamed, if I see anyone's fingerprint on this when I get back, you're all going to have to polish my entire sword collection. He's the god of war, so imagine how many swords that is. Even thinking about it was enough to give all of them sore arms. They bowed to the Empress and the Emperor before leaving and quickly exited the room, looking back to see the tears Elgaldi had fought so hard to retain begin to fall down his cheek. Nothing would ever be the same again. Mini theatre. Emperor, look at the flooring. Empress, yes, dear. Emperor, it's brand new. Empress, we've had it for 4,000 years, darling. You complain about it being unfashionable every day. Staff, we have spare replacement tiles. Emperor, no, I had to replace the whole thing now. Staff, we can just take this tile out and replace it. Emperor storms out. Empress sips tea. Just replace this tile and tell him you did the whole thing. He won't notice. Because he is dumb. End of chapter 13. Any questions? Any questions? While I take a drink break because I want to be able to at least get to chapter 20 tonight. And that won't happen without a drink. And arguably, I chose the worst flavour of drink for reading. You got your pastry based like farm. She chose lemon flavour. You're not supposed to drink citrus if you're doing anything with your voice. At least said throat, and that could have been taken a very wrong way. Voice. Definitely voice. Chapter 14. A Farmer's Find. Summer's heat was beginning to ebb away, and each day brought less and less daylight to work by. It was never all that hot here. The altitude meant that even the hottest days of summer were very temperate. Today the sun was warm enough to be out in the field. The little field stood at the foot of a tall mountain whose northern face was already covered in snow. Other mountains that formed the chain rose on the other side of the sloping valley. Normally it would have been better to farm closer to the river's edge, in the lowest point of the valley, where it would be flatter and easier to farm, but this was the only land suitable for the crop that was to be planted. In the corner of the field, where the scabby-looking bushes that made up the border were looking in need of trimming, someone was digging a hole. It wasn't a very big hole. The farmer was digging it with a small hand trowel as he squatted by the side of it. This was the same hole that he dug every year in the pink light of dawn as the birds began to sing. There was no way he would even think about trying to plant anything here without digging the hole for the offering. He wasn't the only person who had dug the hole either. Countless generations of his family had done this. It was a tradition that they had diligently passed down through the years. They weren't the last people to start farming here They weren't the last people to still be farming here in the valley for a reason. Every autumn, a farmer had come here, to this corner of the field, and dug a large hole, big enough to bury a loaf of bread made with the last flour ground from the previous year's wheat grain. It was highly likely he was digging a hole where a hole had already been dug, a hole within a hole. The soil they had dug before him. Sorry, brain word. Read word. No. The soil they had dug before him, the soil they had all made, and the soil they had protected. Every year they saved that flour to make the sacrificial bread to ask for luck in the next harvest, a harvest that his family relied on in order to not starve. There was only one crop that would grow in this soil, and only this field that they could grow it in. The next settlement wasn't for miles. You had to traverse an entire mountain range to get there, and travellers rarely crossed in the opposite direction, even in the summer. His grandfather had told him tales of the rock slide that had buried all the other farmable land beneath boulders and rocks and gravel, choking out the crops that had been planted there. It was a miracle that their own had only faced a thick layer of small rocks. Everyone in the family had banded together back then and dug their way back down to the soil. Most of the other farming families had fled after seeing their harvests destroyed by tons of rock they had no way of clearing before the winter came. Some had held out, slowly clearing the land, but it hadn't been easy to grow enough to live on. Children that would have continued farming the ancestral land disappeared into towns and villages on the other side of the mountains, never to return to the soil. Despite his own family having removed so much of the rockfall, the shifting soil beneath him had new secrets to be revealed every year. The plough passed through it. It wasn't uncommon to unearth a few rocks. That's why he wasn't overly surprised at first when his trowel hit something solid. The sound it made as it hit off the rock beneath what was rather loud and The vibration that travelled up his arm hurt his wrist. He tried to maneuver the trowel around the sides of the hole, hoping to find the edge of the rock to lever it out of the ground, but he could not find one. He got down onto his knees and brushed at the loose soil surrounding it, enlarging this hole, still in search of the edge of this stubborn fieldstone. It seemed like it was going to be one of the bigger ones. A fieldstone this size and sitting so shallowly in the soil would definitely damage the plough or harrow if it wasn't dug up. If you don't know what a harrow is, it's something they use to like flatten the soil. It's like a big rake that you pull on the back of a tractor or an ox or a horse or something. And essentially, like it helps like pick up stones. It like jiggles them to the surface so you can get rid of them, but also it like flattens the soil out after you've ploughed and planted stuff because uh having the wouldn't know I grew up in the countryside with you and my lack of farming knowledge at this exact moment. Furrows. I can't remember what the peaks are called, but it flattens them back out again so that the seed doesn't wash out of the soil or get eaten by birds. It like helps distribute the seed better. And like when it comes out of there, like now, it's a tractor like attachment that like spits the seed out. But like in olden times, you just employed someone to go around with a bag and just like use their arm to throw it. And now I totally forgot where we were. Uh, yeah, but because it's like a rake, the metal pieces on it are called tines. And if you hit like a big rock or just like there's not a lot of soil before stone, or even sometimes if like the ground is too hard, it will bend the tines and you have to like bend them back. Sometimes they snap off if it's you know, real hard or you just have a real old one because the metal gets brittle over time. Anyway, finding it now was a good thing, and he made sure to thank whoever it was that had guided the trowel and his hand to it. It was a good thing that he still kept the old ways, otherwise he would have been out of both time and money this winter. Bent harrow tines weren't fun to straighten, and a damaged plough blade was a 3-day journey to a blacksmith to fix. Something this big might have left him having to buy an entirely new one, and that was something his paltry savings could not afford. After 10 minutes of digging, and still not finding the edge of the stone, he went back up to the farmhouse to fetch a spade. Every spadeful of dirt that he removed in order to find an edge to the stone surprised him. The thing that he had at first thought to be the size of a large plate, a real chunky lump of limestone or granite that had tumbled down the mountain, was definitely bigger than that now. As more and more was unearthed, he could see carvings on it and what looked like they might be words. He could read, but the shape of these words was different to those his mother had taught him at the kitchen table all those years ago. They seemed like they were important, despite his inability to read them. No one went to the effort of carving something into a rock without having something to say that they thought other people should see. This finding seemed important enough that he should probably tell someone else about it. Little did he know, this discovery was going to make him richer than any wheat field could have. Mini theatre. Dethos, I love bread, thank you. Ancient farmer, please let the harvest be good so that we can send you more bread. Dethos, sure, sure. So about that recipe, Ancient farmer laughs awkwardly, trying to hide the evidence that he bought it. I'm sorry, it's Hovis. It's Hovis best of both. Other breads are available. End of chapter 40. To be fair, Hovis best of both. This is the best of both. You want a white bread that has all the goodness of brown bread. What we do is we get brown bread and white bread and we mix them together. So it's not dry, but it's also not as bad for you as white bread is. Anyway, enough of me promoting what Hovis. To be honest, I also have a bread. Like, Dethos's obsession with bread, which is, sensible as a god of wheat and wheat byproducts, as a god that has a bread museum in his house. It's just living my dream. So I also love bread. I once carried a huge loaf of bread from when I was at uni home in the rain like a child because I'd had to do like I had to like not eat carbs for like 3 or 4 days or something for like some sort of test for diabetes. And those 4 days were literal torture. Like to the point of where you like start dreaming about bread. So I went in the rain to buy this loaf of bread. And it was legitimate, like huge. It was raining and I was like, no. And I couldn't put it in a bag because it would have got squished. And I was like, I refuse. I will take this. I will walk 30 minutes to the supermarket and then I will walk 30 minutes back. And all my flatmates will stare at me when I come through the door like they always did when I bought food. Uh, one day we'll all learn more about my flatmates at the time because they were weird. Adam knows everything. What? Never walk home with bread. I needed to. I needed it. Otherwise, I would have literally gone insane at the time. I was having a very bad time. Imagine you're having a really bad time and everyone's like, "Yeah, we're gonna do a blood glucose test where you're not allowed to eat carbohydrates because and it's at like the worst point of your life." Uh, you're like, "I'm just gonna go insane." Not a great time. That bread was great though, but I think that's more the fact that I hadn't eaten it in 4 days. Uh, so like I can never be 4 days without bread because it's like physically impossible. As I once, there's two things that I can't survive. That is dry food. I think I once said to someone that like, dry food may kill me. Gotta have a sauce on something. Uh, and lack of bread, which is a real problem as a diabetic person. Can't leave me alone with it. I will eat it. Back to the story. Chapter 15. Maybe that was a bad idea? When Dax woke up for the third time, he was tightly rolled up in a ball of blankets, and it took him a while to realise why he felt so uncomfortable. This is the blood chapter, by the way. So wanting blood. Many bloods. All the bloods. But it's also not blood coloured, so maybe that's alright. I don't know. It's God blood. Uh, he was cold, so cold that his arms were shaking and his teeth were chattering. It was so bad that he couldn't support himself enough to sit up, and he fell back down into the mountain of pillows with a loud flump. The temple fire was still burning away as strongly as it had been before, but he could no longer feel its warmth. Dax reached out a hand and touched the blanket that he was wrapped that, that he was wrapped so tightly in. His hand came back wet, cold, and wet. The blanket was soaked, so wet that the liquid dripped heavily from his hands back into the fabric, where it pooled on the surface. The fabric could no longer absorb any more fluid. His first thought was that it had rained and the roof had leaked, but then he remembered where he was. There had been no source of water in the cave other than the lake. If rain on the surface was able to penetrate the rock enough to cause a roof to leak, or the lake was rising enough to flood the temple, he had bigger problems to be dealing with. His second thought was that his bladder had given out on him during his sleep. It was embarrassing, but everyone has wet the bed at least once. Cleaning it was going to be a nightmare, though. There was only the lake water to wash it in, and even with the fire, it would take hours to dry. The entire time he had been here so far, he hadn't felt the need to use the bathroom, but maybe eating those mushrooms had done something to him. Never eat glowing purple mushrooms, my friends. A sudden wave of pain punched its way through his thoughts, leaving him rolling around on the floor in an attempt to find relief. He almost threw up. It was so intense. The effort that he put into not throwing up immediately had him breaking out in a cold sweat. Every breath out he took felt like it could trigger a vomiting episode, and the only thing that brought any relief was to continuously breathe in. I had those moments, and it's rough. His shaking increased at the realization that it wasn't urine he was soaked in, but blood. The dried blood on the bandages had glittered, but Dax had just assumed that he had contaminated them with leaf dust at some point. It hadn't really crossed his mind till now that the blood was blood, even though he had seen it earlier when he had first burst open the scab. The weird gold-tinted blood that the body of Dethos, the god of wheat, possessed shined back at him in the dim light from the fire. Once the initial intensity of the pain had passed, Dax found himself better able to sense the location of the wound that caused all of this mayhem. It was on his back. One of the wounds that had reopened slightly when he was trying to clean earlier had completely popped open. At least that is what it felt like when his hand found the edge of it, careful not to stick his dirty fingers into the open wound, and mindful that it would probably open further if he strained too much to reach it. There was little that he could do. Dax scrambled to find the dry bandages and then struggled desperately to tie them tight enough to stop the bleeding. Straining to wrap it in any way that could put compression on the area was putting all the other barely knitted together wounds at risk of reopening too. He had fleeting thoughts about how badly it was going to get infected, but that was superseded by the accompanying thought that it could only get infected if he didn't bleed to death first. The 18th wrap of the bandage, now so tight he could barely breathe, reduced the flow of golden blood. It was more a gentle seep than the gush it had been before. Dax's heart was beating so rapidly, it almost felt like it wasn't doing anything at all. He felt dizzy, so he made sure to lie down face first on a dry and relatively clean part of the floor. It wouldn't do to faint and give himself a concussion as well as bleed to death. Dax's whole world began shrinking around him. The pain ate away at his thoughts until he fell into a void of nothing but the pain. He could still see and hear, but his brain was so overstimulated that he couldn't take any of it in. Logically, he could have said that he was seeing the flames of the temple fire, hearing it crackle, and feeling the texture of the floor against his cheek, but his brain was too busy screaming at him that there was something terribly wrong with the rest of his body. He couldn't even tell exactly where the pain was coming from anymore. Dax just laid on the floor and prayed that it would go away so he wouldn't have to feel it anymore. And then he fainted. Again. System chimed in an almost annoyed fashion. It would, of course, be nice if the protagonist was conscious for more than 5 minutes, but what are you going to do about it? It circled around him, scanning his body, checking to see if there was anything that it could do to help, but it was unfortunately not fitted with any medical functions. How convenient for the. For now, Dax was on his own. The system checked the alarm it had set for the arrival of help and sighed. The rescue party was still an hour away. Mini theatre. Dax, I'm unconscious again? Arthur, you lost a lot of blood. Dax, and why didn't you do anything to help? System, I do not possess any medical functions. Arthur, why did you forget that the body you're in is covered in wounds? Dax, stares in judgment. Arthur, I promise this is the last time. I think. Dax, you think? Yeah, I truly think It's the last time he's unconscious. You know, sometimes it's plot convenience. be unconscious. End of chapter 15. Now we have a stretch break. Oh, everyone says stretch a little bit. Take a sip of some portable liquid. Because otherwise we're not going to make it all the way. We're trying to make it to chapter 27, my friends. We want to get to chapter 20 at least, but we're trying to make it to 27. Chapter 16. You should be sleeping. In the grand scheme of things, it didn't take Omdum and Mother Willow very long to rush Elgaldia to the place where Dethos had been hidden away. It was almost comical how close the two of them had been for all this time. The rescue group landed on the side of a celestial mountain, floating on its own little island of clouds somewhat distant from the nearest settlement. Although there were only 4 cities, the other 3 having been much better named than Heavenly City. In the heavenly realm, there were many other places that deities chose to live. Some preferred to take the path of aesthetic isolation, meditating in isolation, but that was getting harder and harder to find as it had long gone out of style. Humans wanted a deity that would answer their prayers in a timely manner, not someone who sat in contemplation of the movements of the stars for thousands of years and gave them poetically written but puzzling advice. The seeming remoteness of the mountain was increased by the absence of any buildings surrounding it for several leagues. Elgaldo was used to seeing every possible surface covered in buildings. Real estate space in Heavenly City was pretty packed these days, so finding spaces like this that were basically untouched was increasingly unusual. Large open spaces were usually under the protective ownership of the nature gods, goddesses, and deities, if they existed at all. Mother Willow floated on a willow branch with her hands resting on the mossy-coated rock. This outcrop of the celestial mountain was covered in a thick layer of alpine club moss. Its dull greyish-green leaves were covered in a thin mist of dew, parted at her arrival to reveal the rocky face of the mountain beneath it. Energy flowed through the goddess's palms like tree sap, its colour as deep as honey. As it hit the mossy outcrop, the rock beneath it began to peel away from the mountain as if she was preparing an unusually shaped fruit. Moving the sheer amount of rock was impressive on its own. Doing it with what looked like hardly any effort on her part was incredibly impressive. It was easy to forget just how much power the ancient goddesses were capable of wielding. She manipulated the rock further, forming a small but perfectly circular hole. The hole widened and deepened with every pulse of her power that left her body, until an opening formed on the other side. For a second, Elgaldia thought that she had carved a hole all the way through to the opposite side of the mountain, but instead of seeing bright sunlight shining back at them, there was only a dim purple glow. Mother Willow had just opened an entrance into a large underground cave. The desperation to see Dethos that had only been growing from the moment that the crystal bell had first rang began to morph itself into fear now that the god of war was close to his goal. They were so close to one another. They had always been so close to one another. How was he meant to process that? Has he always been here in this cave? Had they moved him during the past 4,000 years? Elgaldia thought back to the nights where he had searched feverishly every temple, every holy place that had ever been linked to the god of wheat, every place that had ever been associated with him by even the smallest degree. He'd stood in wheat fields, burying bread offerings in every corner, hoping to summon him. Planting and harvesting seasons were when Dethos was the busiest. Harvest festivals, beer brewing, whiskey festivals, all checked in vain. Even the bread festival that he had loved so much, one he never missed, that he talked endlessly about all year. Bread was Dethos's favourite thing. He'd even stood in the museum gazing, not glaring, or glazing, gazing through the glass at the proof the wheat god had once been here. The god of war followed every lead. Elgaldi had hounded every single deity, even slightly linked to the House of Healing, and he'd done it for hundreds of years. He'd even swallowed his pride and gone down to the underworld to beg the deities of death for any sign that Dethos may have passed through their arms. All they could do was hold him in their many arms as he screamed. The Hall of Lifetimers could only be entered by the dead, so the god of war could not enter, and deities of death had no mouths with which to speak. But they had still shown him, knowing the agony coursing through him. Despite everything, there had been neither hide nor hair of Dethos to be seen in the three realms since then. Killing a heavenly being was hard, but not impossible. A deity could lose their physical manifestation, but the belief from their followers in their stored heavenly powers would help them create a new body or repair the old one. It just took a lot of time, even by immortal being standards. So Ilgaldir had waited, believing that one day Dethos would walk back into his life with a new body. Humans relied heavily on wheat. They wouldn't forget. They couldn't forget. At some point, the Empress of Heaven had had the crystal bell installed in Dethos's courtyard at the centre of the labyrinth, connected to Dethos's protection seal, to stop him from going completely mad. It would ring, they had told him, if Dethos had returned. No one wanted to re-experience an out-of-control god of war. They'd all seen how bad that could get on more than one occasion. Until now, that bell had remained silent. Let me refresh the page because it says I'm not streaming. But I am. I'm still here. The god of healing came to rest beside them, checking the contents of the medical bag he had brought with them. As Mother Willow widened their passage into the cave. He was here all the time, Ilgaldir asked, his voice strained, holding back all the things he wanted to shout whilst holding firmly onto the collar of the recipient. Omdum's expression was gentle and his tone was reassuring when he answered, I wasn't going to not keep an eye on him. What'd you take me for? The god of killing patients via medical negligence? Before the conversation could get any deeper, Mother Willow was beckoning them into a cave through an opening that could easily have fit an average-sized dragon through it. Within the cave, all was silent, except for the sound of gravel as it crunched under their feet and the slap of their shoes against the flat black rock. Passing under the caps of giant glowing purple mushrooms, they made their way down a shallowly sloping shore to a vast lake. Its surface was mirror still, and on the shore stood a singular tree. A single golden-coloured leaf hung from the end of one of its branches. But as Mother Willow passed by, vivid green leaves rapidly budded and then burst open all over the plant. Her presence tended to have that effect on plants. She'd saved a lot of humans' half-dead succulents over the years. If you have a succulent that didn't die when you thought it was going to die, it was Mother Willow that saved you, and it. Omdum's face began to look increasingly concerned as he gazed out over the lake. It was too quiet. He could feel Dethos's presence here, but it was faint and hard to pinpoint. Upon waking, the weak god would still be weak. Omdum hadn't expected that he would be able to escape the chains beneath the surface of the water. It was looking increasingly certain that he had the longer he peered into the murky depths of the lake. The god of healing could also feel something pulling him to the temple within the cave. He tried to look through the painting of himself that hung in the outer room to see where the pull was coming from, but all he could see was a very grainy, still image on the opposite wall. Whatever had happened to it over the preceding years had made it too damaged for him to walk through. The trio were going to have to get there on foot. They reached the door of the temple's outer room, and Ilgaldir didn't need to be the god of healing to know that something was wrong. Initially, it smelled wrong, but as they got closer, he could see something that set every hair on his body standing to attention. He'd seen enough blood in his life, he'd seen enough of this person's blood in particular to know something very bad was happening. I thought you were keeping an eye on him. Ilgaldir was doing his best not to get into a rage or scream in horror as he sprinted the last remaining meters to the door. The waters of the lake should have healed him almost fully by now. The enchantment I placed on him was for him to wake only once healed, Omdum said, rapidly pulling out healing tools from his belt and running after the larger god. There are bigger things to deal with right now, Mother Willow chastised, pointing to the footprints of golden blood that marred the steps down from and up to the temple, and the blood smeared on the door handle itself. Omdum ran up the stairs, pushed his way past Ilgaldir, and threw open the door. The sight that met them all was horrifying. There was Dethos, lying face down in a pool of glittering liquid, which shone in the dancing flames of the offering fire. It looked like a catastrophic amount of blood loss. The smell of blood once the door had been opened was so strong that Elgaldia was forced to take several steps backwards to not immediately become overwhelmed by it. Being the god of war didn't make you immune to things like this. In fact, he found that it often disturbed him more than others. He knew the weight blood carried and how many people didn't come back from wounds that bled this badly. How many humans, gods, and demons he'd had to bury. Omdom shouted for him to hand over his outer robe and to fetch some water from the lake, and that shocked him out of the paralysis memories had placed upon him. He hurriedly threw the robe into the arms of Mother Willow and made his way back down to the lake shore. He cursed himself for this being the one time he had not brought a helm with him as he slipped on the wet algae-coated rocks. It would have done wonders, holding the water for him. He'd used it to fetch water countless times before. The thought of cupping water in his hands came to his mind, but there was no way he would be able to carry enough liquid to be of any practical use that way. What if his hands contaminated it in some way? Then he remembered that he stored vessels in his dimensional ring for this exact purpose. The gold ring with a small black stone setting stored a lot of things, and it was very helpful when wearing armour. Plate mail was not known for its pockets, and you could store a lot of things in a ring that had a portal to a pocket dimension in it. Elgaldia had once known a god that carried an entire flotilla of boats in his dimensional ring, so that he could go fishing whenever his wife was busy. It would have been uncomfortable to do so, in a pocket. He ran back with 2 large jars full of lake water as quickly as he dared, without spilling half of it over himself or dropping them. Time was truly of the essence. When he returned, the god of healing and Mother Willow knelt down on either side of Dethos. They had thrown the outer robe he had given them over the weak god's back. The robe swamped the much smaller body. Dethos was lying face down in the doorway between the inner and outer rooms. Elgaldia stumbled, sloshing some of the water over himself despite his best efforts, as he was yet again assaulted by the smell of blood. What wounds he could see that weren't covered by the robe were painful enough to look at. He didn't know whether he would be able to hold himself together if he was also having to look at Dethos's pain-filled face at the same time. His hair was untied, someone had carefully swept it aside so that they could tend to his wounds, but it was too sodden with blood that was quickly beginning to dry. Mother Willow had a hand placed on the back of Dethos's neck, using her powers to take the pain away and make him more comfortable. Oh, sorry for yawning. I spent most of this week asleep, as I said before. So tired. But it is 9 p.m. now. Once she was done, Omdom helped her turn him over. The god of war's face blanched, immediately transported to the last time he had looked at this face. It hadn't been all that dissimilar. The clang of sword on sword and the whoosh that accompanied spiritual attacks, screams, it all flooded his senses. You were late, so you missed the previous times when I yawned directly into the mic. Because it doesn't matter if I start streaming at 9 a.m. my time, or 5 p.m. my time, or 7 p.m. my time. I'm equally as tired. Truly, tomorrow's stream I will also be yawning. I promise you. It hadn't been all that dissimilar. The clang of sword on sword and the whoosh that accompanied spiritual attacks, screams, it all flooded his senses. Overwhelmed, overstimulated, Elgaldia held onto the water jugs with everything he had. That was the past. He breathed through his mouth. Dethos was bleeding, nearly half buried under fallen rock and dirt. You couldn't change the past. They were both screaming. You can only strive to do better in the present. Old Mother Willow patted him on the arm gently as she gathered the blood-soaked clothing, bandages and blankets and tossing them out of the door. It helped reorientate him to what was going on, and he was grateful he didn't need to be another burden to them right now. He could fall apart later. Right now, he needed to be present to help save Dethos. I brought the water, El Galdia announced to Omdom, who snatched one of the water jugs, lifted up the robe, and poured the entire contents over the weak god's front. There wasn't enough time, and the most worrying wound was so large that delicately applying the healing water to the wound was incredibly impractical. Better just pour it over the weak god's entire torso and hope for the best. The lake is fed from a holy spring that has healing powers. It should help seal the wound quickly, Omdom said. Help me roll him over again. We can use the other jug on his back. The god of war helped to roll Dethos onto his front once more, using his utmost care to not hold any part of his body too tightly or for too long. He truly felt like he was committing an egregious crime touching him, but Tethos was injured and needed help, even if that help was from him. Flipping him over was easy. The god of wheat barely weighed anything. Elgaldia had swords that were heavier than him. The god of healing sighed deeply, looking at the mess that was his back. He took the other jug and deftly doused it in healing water as well. Though the edges of the deep slash knitted together quickly, it remained as red and angry looking. Remained as an red and angry looking inflamed ridge, as did all the other wounds. Mother Willow stepped back into the temple. It's too early for him to be awake. You could say that again, Omdom said as he maneuvered Dethos into the recovery position. He should still be sleeping at the bottom of the lake, surrounded by its healing waters. Mini theatre. Elgaldia, where are the vessels? Pulls out random things from the dimensional ring. Arthur, boats or containers? Elgaldia, do you think I want a boat right now? Arthur, I don't know. Elgaldia, you made this. You know what's in here. Arthur, you're the one that hoards items in there. Elgaldia, just help me find something to put water in. Arthur pulls out 2 decorative vases. End of chapter 16. She says, hoping this is indeed chapter 16. And it was. It's amazing how terrible my memory is. 1 second while I get a different chair because my hip is hurting in this one. And I'm back, and equally as uncomfortable actually, which is fun. Well, who cares? Oh, all we're here for is to suffer. Chapter 17. Why is it so bright in here? When at long last, Dax finally opened his eyes. For what felt like the millionth time, they began to water immediately. They had grown so accustomed to the dim purple light emitted from the purple mushrooms in the cave that the world now seemed painfully bright. Dax's vision was filled with the harsh white light that was inescapable even if he closed his eyes and placed his hands over the top of them. His eyes began watering even more, and he felt the strong urge to sneeze tickling at the back of his throat. Or nose. You know, wherever you sneeze from. I don't know why I said throat. Blinking his eyes open and closed rapidly beneath his fingers, Dax hoped to regain some semblance of normal sight. He didn't know where he was or what was going on. For all he knew, he was sitting on the surface of the sun. It was so bright. Every direction he turned in hopes of finding some relief from the assault was in vain. Surely this wasn't heaven, right? He might be inhabiting the body of a god, but he didn't think that he would be able to function if heaven looked like this. A featureless white void. Dax panicked momentarily that the system had gotten annoyed with his inability to stay conscious for an extended amount of time and had actually, for real this time, killed him off. Maybe right now, as he was thinking this, the system was already reading out its introductory message to some other dead person who was better at escaping mysterious, mystical underground caves. The thought of spending eternity laying in a white void with no way of moving and nothing to mark the passing of time was horrifying. After his thoughts felt a little less fuzzy from sleep, Dax took in 2 deep breaths, and he held his breath so that he could concentrate whilst listening for even the smallest of sounds. The initial panic at being fired from his second life. Imagine being fired from Second Life. I I don't know why it makes me think of that, but it does. The initial panic at being fired from his second life began to reside as he strained his hearing for any clue as to where he was. It was quiet in this room. His breathing was the only noise within it, but in the distance he could hear the sounds of people moving around and talking to one another. Dax removed his hands from his still tightly shut eyes and clapped them once, listening intently to the sound that was produced for clues. It did not echo the way that sounds within the cave had echoed, and so he deduced that he was in a moderately large room. Dax sighed. Why did they feel the need to light this room so excessively? Which is true. Hospitals are usually like very bright. At either side of him, he tentatively felt the surface which he was laying on. Relief flooded over him at the sensation of bed linen under his fingers. It felt expensive, the sort that didn't pill in the washing machine. The mattress that he was laying on felt comfortable. It made him wonder why he hadn't noticed the sensation of lying on it until now. He spent his time in the cave, lying on a jumble of blankets on the floor. Dax's spine was thanking him for being able to lie flat properly and not scrunched up like a boiled prawn. Or a boiled shrimp for non-prawn use. Prawn. Not the one with an O. Feeling the mattress and the high-quality bedding beneath him really solidified his deduction that he was no longer in the cave where he had been living for the past few days. Slowly more details came into his view as his eyes began to adjust to the light levels around him. He may no longer be in the cave, but he was also unfortunately not back in the internet cafe or his own bedroom, nor was he returned to the body of Dax Moonfield on Earth. Dax was, though, in a room filled with decoratively carved wooden furniture and delicate crystal lamps hung from beams on the ceiling. It was these lamps that had caused all of the eye pain upon waking. He glared at them. The lamps hung down from the ceiling on thin golden chains and were powered by wands and scepters of some white-coloured crystal. Each crystal was bound with gold bands and hung on the ends of the impossibly thin chains. Dax found himself feeling very grateful that they weren't hung over the bed. Preoccupied worrying about being impaled by one of the crystals in his sleep would have taken up. Preoccupied worrying. You know, everyone needs shrimp translation, you know. You either need a prawn translation or you need a shrimp translation, and you know, I'm here to provide that for you. Preoccupied worrying about being impaled by one of the crystals in his sleep would have taken up a lot of his mental bandwidth. They were the sort of lamps that architects would tell you you had to have in order to express the soul of the house, but they were both a dust trap and a safety hazard. If anyone's ever watched Grand Designs, you know what I mean. Grand Designs is an architecture show in which middle class people turn up and they say, we want a unique house. And then they all build either a wooden and glass box or a white concrete and glass box in which they have no furniture and stairs that don't have a handrail. And then they have children. And you're like, what is wrong with you? Why did you do this? And then all the neighbors are angry because it's an ugly house. And it's like 8 times the size of all the other surrounding houses. And it just looks so ugly. Or you have that family where they were like, they bought a lighthouse and they were going to make it a house to live in. And they were like, our children will grow up here. It'll be so great. And what ended up happening was they went in £7 million worth of debt. The parents got divorced and the children were like in their 20s. True, 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 true. No one ever listens to like the architect that's on the show. They're always like, yeah, you have these you have these worries for me about how expensive this is going to be because you know you work in the industry and you know this shit. And then but my architect thinks that we can do it cheap. Or like or he's like, yeah, if you do this, it's going to be really expensive. You should use this type of window instead. Or he's like, uh, using lime crate, good idea. It takes forever to set, and you're trying to do this in February in Britain. It's gonna rain and it's not gonna set. And when it sets, it's gonna crack because the ground underneath it is gonna be sodden. And you're gonna build a house on it and it's gonna sink. Yeah, we're gonna save money on it and we're gonna do it ourselves, even though both of us have never done anything in construction. Makes sense if you're like actually worked in construction, but they never are. They're always like an office manager from somewhere in London or like the down south. And then the wife is just like miserable. And it's always almost always every episode there's a pregnant wife in a caravan in a trailer because they always end up being like they've run out of money, so they have to sell the house that they're in right now, but they don't have anywhere to go because they're sinking all this money into the new house. So then they like remortgage the house, and then they end up in a trailer on site in winter, freezing, with like 4 kids and a pregnant wife who's just slowly beginning to hate her husband. And then at the end, they're all in like massive debt. Yeah, and they're always at the end. It's like, well, how much did it cost? Because they're like at the beginning, they're like, oh, it's going to cost us this much. It's going to cost us 300K, and we have like a 10% margin for like if things cost a little bit more. And then at the end, they're like, oh, how much did it end up costing you? And they're like, we don't want to talk about it because they're like in like 800 grand's worth of debt at least. But the Lighthouse family are truly like it's the most insane episode because it's not like someone talking about having a grass roof and like the architect being like, you do know those leak quite a lot. It's like a new technology. We need to like if you're gonna do this, you need to like understand that like the roof has to withhold the weight of this, otherwise it'll crack, and then someone's house will crack, and you'll be like, I did say that. It's not specific. It happens every episode. So I was working class people watch it just to feel better about ourselves because we'd never do something that's stupid. Like imagine having a house. Like imagine that. Yeah. It costs us a little bit more than we expected. So you're like, oh, maybe like 10 grand, maybe 15 grand. No, no, no. It's like we triple mortgaged this. And then we borrowed everything the bank would give us. And then my mother died, so then she gave us money when she died, and we used that. And then my granddad gave us his life savings, and then my children emptied their piggy bank. And we're not going to have Christmas for like 8 years. Uh, we should watch some clips of it and in Discord. You can truly get the feeling because it's always miserable. And they're always like overly excited people who like haven't thought about all the things that could go wrong because they're like, it'll never go wrong because what we're doing is the right thing. It's the right idea. It's such a good idea. It couldn't possibly go wrong. And we don't have a plan B because no one needs a plan B because it's going to work this time. And you're like, it's going to suck. It's going to rain all over your unset concrete. Uh, one of the builders is just going to fuck off and not turn up. You're gonna have a fight with your architecture. Your architect. You're gonna have a fight with the architecturist. Architecturist? That's not it. The architect. My brain went archaeologist, architect, architecturists. I'm sure there's probably an architecturist out there. Yeah, you're gonna fight with the architecture person because they're gonna be like, you should do this, and it's gonna cost you like 8 grand more. Because they're like, well, it'll look aesthetic, and you're like, I don't care. I don't care about your crazy ideas, Nigel. I want to not spend 25k more on a lamp. Oh yeah, and it's either a miserable wife or like a wife that's like gaslit her like miserable husband who's been like working all day and then coming to a construction site and then doing construction, like figuring out how to do like uh everything that you can do on your own legally, which is like no electrics, no gas, because that's how you blow a house and die. Uh it's I don't know, it's one of those shows that's very British and like the misery is part of the enjoyment. Sorry, I just full on headbutted the mic again. The misery is part of the enjoyment of the show. Because like from the beginning you go like, is this one of the couples that's gonna to get divorced by the end of this? And then one of them's just left with the unfinished house. Or it's one of those houses where they have to keep coming back on different seasons to see whether they've finished it. And it takes like 9 hours of content to figure out that it takes like 9 hours of content for them to make this house, and it's like over 8 years or something. Like the Lighthouse Family, like, ugh, I need to make Adam watch this stuff about the Lighthouse Family because I know it went viral on TikTok a few months ago, but like, because people brought because they're trying to sell it now because like they have no money and they're divorced and they're both remarried, I think. And they're like, it's finally done. We can get rid of it. And like, I think they were trying to sell it for like 8 million, and it's like you you were 7 million in debt. Like, it's gonna be rough. Also, it's literally like a lighthouse on the side of a cliff. It's highly likely it is. Uh, I don't know if I have my Discord link in the like below chat below screen. Uh, but if it isn't, I will send you a link to it in Discord after. Feel free to message me about it if I forget, which is highly likely. It's not intentional. Adam, do you think I have a Discord command? Would I be that forward thinking? I have a YouTube one. Yeah. I'll have to put it back in because I think I had issues with it and I had to take it out because it wasn't working. But I think I accidentally put in the one that times out or like has limited use. I don't know. I can't remember. I think I have a timer that's supposed to go off that has it in, but if it works, I do not know. No? Is it a command? It has a weird has a weird thing. Wouldn't be unlike me to do that. No. I'm gonna have to fix it. But yeah, if I if I don't message you about it, feel free to DM me and complain. I won't take it badly. I could just post it in, but I'm highly distracted right now. Back to the chapter. It's about grand design. Grand design is channel 4, right? I'm sure it's channel 4. Or is it ITV? It feels very channel 4 to me, if it is ITV. I don't know, I don't watch TV. It's hard to remember where things belong. He glared at them. The lamps. The lamps hung down from the ceiling on thin golden chains and were powered by wands and scepters of some white-coloured crystal. Oh, I said that. We were worried about the crystals falling and impaling sleep. Complaint about architects. Oh. I should have read one more sentence. Mm. Yeah. It probably will be on Virgin or Sky. Yeah. I was just thinking about doing it from PC. I can't be bothered to. Can't be bothered. Just sign in on PC. They were the sort of lamps that architects would you had to have in order to express the soul of the house, without but that were both a dust trap and a safety hazard. Truly a light that belonged on one of those house shows where people got excited about spending all their money building a monochrome glass box with no furniture where they would raise their sad beige children. Green was the colour of the sheets, a soft pale green, a comforting one. They reminded him of home, where everything was some shade of green. His mother was a little obsessed with the colour. Dax was warm, the wound he'd burst open. Hurt, but not enough to complain about. Certainly a lot less than when he'd burst it open, for sure. He wasn't writhing around on the floor anymore, and that was a positive sign. Despite people wanting to reach out around, despite wanting to reach, I don't know where people came in, despite wanting to reach around and feel the wound, tempting fate into popping it open again, it felt ill-advised. So he resisted, instead inspecting the bandaging across his chest and shoulder in great detail. Whoever had done the wrapping did a great job, with doing it tightly enough to compress his wound but not restrict his breathing. Not bad. Dax reminded himself to thank them if they made an appearance. The initial shock of waking up somewhere else for the second time was wearing off, and Dax was starting to feel the pain of his wound make itself known once more. A loud rumble sounded from his stomach, and it alerted him to the clenching pain that could also be found there. After dining on nothing but boiled lake water and roasted glowing mushrooms, he was starving. The gamer turned guard, grabbed onto the bedside cabinet next to himself, attempting to swing his legs out of the bed as gently as possible, despite them feeling like they were full of lead, when the now familiar chimes of the system's welcome message played. Welcome to the Heavenly Realm, it announced with yet another celebratory spray of golden confetti. Dax brushed it off of the bed covers and the shiny discs fell onto the floor. It was the first time they hadn't disintegrated. I'd really like to not faint again, at least not anytime soon, Dax admonished the floating orb. It was starting to get ridiculous at this point. I can't promise you that, Dax system replied to Dax in its monotone voice, hovering slightly above comfortable eye level. Dax could swear that it was doing it on purpose to annoy him further. You have lost 35% of your total blood volume. Fainting is to be expected. Dax scoffed. Where am I? Congratulations, customer. 19. Sorry, I'm switching my phone off because it keeps binging. Congratulations, customer. 1937. Dax Moonfield, you are currently in the heavenly realm. I mean, you were before, but now you're in the heavenly realms. Capital city. Heavenly city. A small mini-map was projected by the system onto the wall of the room, showing an expansive metropolis to him. A tiny triangle appeared on the map under which were the words, "You are here," helpfully displayed. They really like being heavenly, I guess, Dax chuckled, attempting to get up out of bed again. He felt a little woozy just from sitting up. This got a lot worse once he was actually standing on his feet. Beneath his bare feet, the floor pitched and rolled like a small boat at sea in a storm. Jax's vision came and went as he felt his heart hammering in his chest. Standing had been a bad decision. To prevent himself from fainting yet again, Dax flopped down on the floor. It was less a controlled move than he would have liked. Did you know that Dax's name comes from the Star Trek character Jadzia Dax? It may have happened because I was watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine at the time that I was writing the show. NaNoWriMo 2021. It might have been slightly sleep deprived because I hate naming characters after real people. And you're back, you survived another outbreak. I'll reread that bit. I think it got cut off a bit. To prevent himself from fainting yet again, Dax flopped down on the floor. It was less a controlled move than he would have liked, but it was better than passing out, falling face down, and giving himself a concussion. The body he was currently piloting around was already damaged enough without causing anything else to happen to it. The floor was surprisingly comfortable. It didn't buck around underneath him when he was lying on it, but it took several seconds for his vision to return to normal. He must have made more noise than he thought as someone with two long black braids and lilac robes rushed into the room seconds later. The door of the room bounced off the wall behind him with a resounding slam as they entered. As they went to grab hold of him to help him get back to the bed or lie down on the floor more comfortably, Dax found the body instinctively flinching away from their touch. A heart that had already been pounding in protest at his prematurely upright position kicked into overdrive, as if somewhere deep inside of him, someone had put their foot down on the gas pedal. The other person quickly let go of him. It made things a little better, a little easier to deal with, though now there was a sound he couldn't really comprehend. They were trying to talk to him. He knew that. The body knew that, but that wasn't the sound which was drawing all of his attention to it like a magnet. Someone was screaming. It sounded far away, and Dax wanted someone to help them. He wanted to help them, but he couldn't because he was just so dizzy. So someone else should help them, and they had better do it quickly because the screaming person sounded so distressed. Tears started falling from his eyes, and the hand he raised to wipe them away was shaking so hard that Dax found himself unintentionally poking himself in the eye instead. Ever done that? Just poke yourself in the eye. Uh, Someone who wears eyeliner knows. 100% have done that. Very painful. Eyeliners and pencils. Maybe a slightly less stabby pencil, but it's still a pencil. Sometimes you just gotta leave the house with an eye that's like crying. You stabbed it with an eyeliner. Especially when it's one of those eyeliners that for some reason is rock hard. I never understand that. Why would you make an eyeliner rock hard? I used to have a Barry M eyeliner. It was green. I used to wear it all the time because your girl loves a weird coloured eyeliner. And I could never use it because it was rock hard. Legitimately could have just been a pencil. Is this a colouring pencil? He stabbed himself in the eye with his finger. The healer ran out to get help in another swish of purple fabric. Dax looked at the door, seeing his reflection in the glass. His mouth open, almost comically wide. He felt it with his tear-covered fingers, only then realizing that the person screaming was him, but he couldn't stop himself from doing it. Mini Thea. Purple-robed healer. Can someone help? Senior healer. He's awake already? I'm done. Fuck. Elgaldia. Everything alright in there? Mother Willow. Everyone calm down and stop running around like a bunch of headless chickens. I'm done. This is bad. This is bad. This is very, very bad. This is bad. End of chapter 17. I am taking a drink break. Encourage you all to do too. Because I can feel my voice going. I might make it to 20. We might make it to 20. We might make it to 20. Chapter 18. Can I become one with the floor? The screaming ended just as abruptly as it had begun, and Dax was left with nothing other than a growing feeling of embarrassment. He stared at the floor, taking in every imperfection in the wood. There was a hole where someone had hammered a nail in the wrong place, and then pulled it out in a long semicircular scratch where the door scraped against the wood. Someone had hung it too low, and now it was damaging the floor, like my bathroom door. You can't close fully, otherwise you get trapped in there because it's someone hung it at a weird angle, and I know I have to fix it. But rehanging a door is very stressful. You can't do it on your own. You need two people. Dax hoped that the person that had just tried to help him didn't take him screaming personally. It really hadn't been. He just freaked out. Slowly, Dax laid himself back down on the floor, and after resting in that position for a while, the world began to stop feeling like it was rising and falling beneath him once more. His momentary peace was shattered by the system's familiar voice. Return to Heavenly City, complete, plus 100 points, it remarked brightly, unfazed by the scene it had just witnessed, and the inappropriate tone of its own voice. A fancy rainbow graphic showing plus 100 points in a huge and rather aesthetic font scrolled in front of Dax's eyes. He closed them and hoped, not for the first time, that the system would just go away and leave him alone for a bit. Would asking for some time to actually take in what was happening be too much to ask for? It seemed the answer to that question was yes. Update shop now open. Would you like to peruse the items available? His AI mentor asked, bobbing in front of him and strobing through the colours of the rainbow to match the still active text box. Dax wanted to punch it. His eyes were still struggling to adjust the light levels in the room. He didn't need to add a rainbow strobing light to his list of things overstimulating him. It couldn't hurt. It's not like I'm busy or anything, Dax said sarcastically. He was still laying on the floor, but now flat on his back. Being here felt safe. You can't fall if you're already lying down, after all. System being sophisticated, but not that sophisticated. AI did not pick up on the sarcasm as heavily laden as it had been. It proceeded to read out the items available for purchase from its internal script. The previous text box closed and a new one was presented to him to peruse, featuring the system's internal point shop. Many of the items were greyed out, unlockable only at higher levels. The system drew his attention to two of the lower level upgrades available to him. Available purchases: 1. Priority server access and reduced upgrade download time. Minus 1,000 points. Considering how long it had taken this glowing orb to connect to a server and download the patch needed to be able to answer any of his questions, this was definitely a priority purchase. What if it disconnected or needed to download something when he desperately needed to respond to him? If it had been able to connect quicker in the cave, he might have been able to get out of there himself. Item 2. Deity Identification Tags. On. This add-on allows the user to identify people known to the previous host of the body easily and efficiently. It will also save you the embarrassment of flirting with a mortal enemy or ignoring the Emperor. Minus 1,000 points. This too seemed to be a very important upgrade. If he was going to be required to act in character, it was important to know who people were and what kind of relationship Dethos had held with them earlier. Flailing around socially would highly likely end up in system pulling him off of the job. Like the AI had said previously, there were going to be important people that Dax was going to have to interact with, maybe even family and friends of the former owner of the body. It would be weird not to know who they were, and it would raise a lot of questions that he didn't want to have to answer. A lot could probably be explained by the almost dying and the being newly awoken from the bottom of a lake thing, but not everything. He was probably going to have to blame a lot of that on on amnesia. Amnesia was such a great excuse. The fewer opportunities he had to mess things up and make the system delete him from existence, the better. They're both very useful, definitely. But why are they so expensive? Dax asked. But there was no answer from the floating orb. He may have just earned 100 points, but basic items, well, they should be cheaper. 2,000 points were going to take some time to accumulate, and both items were something that he needed yesterday. In the brightness of the room, it was impossible to mark the passing of time. Everyone's favourite trope, amnesia. Because it's, uh, ow, convenient for the plot. Ow, itchy elbow. Num. In the brightness of the room, it was impossible to mark the passing of time. There was no window to look out of, and no natural light. From his position still on the floor, hours could have passed since the person in purple robes had fled the room. It was more likely that it had been a few minutes, he reasoned with himself. Surely if you walked into a room and a sick person started screaming, you would hurry a little when getting back to them. Hopefully, they would be here soon, and they would bring him food because he was starting to feel the same nausea he had in the cave. I yawned again. Oh no. Dax hadn't been able to cook enough purple mushroom then to fill his stomach, and he had no idea how long he had been unconscious. But now he was on his own with his fickle, low-grade system until someone came. Mini theatre system. System is not responsible for in-game purchases made by customers. All purchases are carried out at your own risk. Author. You gotta, you got to get hold of the pricing, or there's going to be some issues. Dax. Yeah, 1,000 points for each of these is a rip-off. When will you stop monetizing features that should come with the base game? Author. Give me my swimming pool and functional cars, goddammit. System. Dot dot dot. End of whatever chapter that was. 18. Truly. When a game just like takes things out for no reason. Like when The Sims 4 came out and they were like, oh, there's not going to be any swimming pools or cars or, ghosts. The thing that's been in here since Sims 1. We're just not going to have them. Just no. The game that's like still broke came out in 2014. And every time something new comes out, it just breaks everything. It's literally so bad now that everyone's like, you gotta wait a few weeks till they still don't have cars. Sims 5 already scares me because they're like, it's gonna be multiplayer, and I'm like, do you know who plays this game? Sims players don't play any other game, and they don't like playing with other people. Like you're trying to get Fortnite players to, I don't know, very weird to me, and I don't even understand how you could make it like online multiplayer. Like, what would that even mean? Because people don't want to be a sim. They want to, because you can just play many other games. If you want to be a sim, Just play just play Final Fantasy 14. Like people who play Sims want to like there's many different types, but you have people who want to remake their family like exactly, or celebrities, or whatever. Like they want to like make a specific thing. You have people who just like making houses and decorating them. You have people who just love killing things when they get annoyed. That's very true. Very true. Like if you own entirety of Sims 4, that's like hundreds of pounds. It's hundreds of pounds. Because like DLC isn't uh like $10. It's like 60. So you want vampires? 30 quid please. And stuff packs. Like I hate stuff packs. So like here's 5 things you can put in your game and you're like, remember Sims 2 when like loads of people were modding it? Like items? And it was way easier because you literally encouraged people to mod. She says as someone who used to make CC. I used to make skin colors. Nah. Sims 2 back in the day. Like they used to really encourage that part of the thing, and now it's like, it's insane. But it's EA, what can we expect? Sims and FIFA. I think they have a basketball thing, and I think Adam or Paul told me they have Madden. It's insane. And yet they still haven't dropped the price on Sims 3. Like base game Sims 4, free to play, free to play. Sims 3, it's the same price as it was when it came out, pretty much. Like base game. I feel like all Sims 3 base game, apart from like seasons, pets, uh, like the big ones, like the ones that had vampires. I can't remember what they call them because it changes every one. I feel like you would just keep the same name for like the ones that are legendary, like seasons, pets. Seasons and pets were like more expensive than that. I think they were 30 quid. But I feel like every other one was like 17 quid, and then like the stuff packs were like maybe 12 or something. Uh, Back in the day, because I'm an old woman. I'm an old piece of pastry. Uh, it's literally insane. So we're all looking forward to when the rivals games are coming out. I can't wait for Paralives. But also I think people have to like they want full game Sims 4. From level stuff from like a tiny indie developer. And that's not gonna be quick. We think about all the things that are in The Sims, like it's also why they can't really play test Sims games very well because there's so many like diverging paths and like how many generations do you have in your family? You know, there's some really specific glitches. I think at this point everyone's heard the Sims 3 patch notes, some meme somewhere where it's like, uh, you can't, you can't be killed depending on your band affiliation. Children, if a asteroid hits the Earth, then everyone will run out of the building unless it's a school in which no one can leave and everyone will die. There used to be a Sims 2 glitch where if you had a baby in the family and the whole family went out to a community lot and they were in the car, the adult carrying the baby, if they were the driver, the baby would be stuck to and when they were driving. So funny. And there was a glitch I got once in a legacy challenge when I was like 8 generations in, and you know when the game just starts breaking because it's like too much stuff. Uh, where uh the the toilet training the like miniature toilet had music notes coming out of it, like the little like keyboard thing that babies can use. It just glitched and you got like music coming out of the toilet. Just so many things. Like I can't believe they didn't have ghosts in Sims 4 in the beginning, because ghosts won't make the game. Like if you haven't had something stolen from your plot by a ghost, if ghosts aren't eating your food, are you playing the game? You know, ghosts aren't fixing your TV for you or breaking your TV for you. Throwing a fit because your house is too unclean. Uh, moving books. Books are the vein of my life. When Sims have just put books on the floor, and you're like, I'm gonna spend forever trying to find it. Chapter 19. So we meet again. There was still no sign of the purple-robed person returning. Apparently he'd scared them off. Once he felt safe enough to do so, Dax peeled himself back up off the floor, using the bed as leverage. Standing up slowly, carefully leaning over the bed in case he passed out, meant that he no longer felt like he was going to pass out. Dax decided whilst he was waiting that it would be a good idea to take a little wander around the room. There were a lot of interesting things to see in here that he hadn't really been able to get a good look at yet. He was walking a little bandy-legged like a baby deer, struggling to find its feet, but walking was walking. To be safe and help himself support his body a little with his arms, Dax decided to use the bed and furniture in the room to cruise around to prevent making another unexpected visit with the floor. There were a few cupboards that he could open, but there was nothing interesting inside them, only more clothing and fresh blankets. It took some self-restraint not to stroke all the fabric. It looked very soft and comfortable. On a shelf in the corner were an interesting collection of shells and a large, shallow glass bowl. They were so big and brightly coloured that it was easy to mistake them for plastic replicas, but as he picked one up, Dax was surprised by its light weight. Looking closely, you could see the outlines on the shell that denoted the animal's growth, and the inside gleamed with the oily sheen of mother of pearl. There were other various knickknacks dotted around, and a painting of a field filled with ripened grain and wildflowers that hung between the two bookcases. A nice detail to add to the room of a grain deity, it didn't go unnoticed. The quick trip around the room drained what little energy that he had managed to recoup from his short stint lying on the floor. Dax lost the grip that he had on the cupboard and just felt his legs collapsing under him with all the supportive strength of wet spaghetti. Someone grabbed him under the armpits before he could crash onto the floor and knock himself out on the corner of a bookcase. I'm practically one with the floor at this point, Dax thought, a chuckle almost escaping from between his lips. It was almost as funny as it was depressing. The person holding him's grip was tentative, as if they were expecting him to break like a crystal vase or an overripe soft fruit, or they were expecting a violent response, given that he had screamed at the last person that tried which given that he had screamed at the last person that tried to touch him, Dax didn't blame them. Either way, he was just happy he wasn't having a panic attack again. Thanks, he said brightly as they helped him back over to the bed. As they rearranged the myriad of pillows behind him, he managed to get a look at their face. Dax had expected that it would be the purple-robed person from earlier. Instead, it was an incredibly jacked-looking guy, reuniting with the god of war. Plus 150 points, the system announced as it rolled out yet another flashing graphic of the points he had just accrued. Dax looked at the message and then at the god of war's face, back and forth, rapidly concerned that he had heard the declaration, or could see his reward message. The god's face remained concerned, but he showed no inkling that he was party to the interaction between Dax and the system. Only you can hear or see the system, it explained, closing the flashing window. This was good news, at least. Dax didn't have to explain why he was talking to an orb. So was this the god of war? That would explain the sheer size of this man. Built like a brick shithouse, Dax thought to himself. Not someone you would easily pick a fight with if you knew what was best for you. Unless you were looking for a free trip to the underworld anyway. From the other person's lack of response to systems alerts and just general presence, Dax deduced that he was the only person that could see and hear it. He didn't know whether that was a comforting or distressing revelation. When you speak to me, only I can see that too. It's a lot of complicated physics that would take too long to explain. AKA the author just doesn't want to explain it. It just exists. Just believe me. Just try to manage your facial expression. Everyone else can still see that, the system said, levitating itself to hover just over the god of war's head. A few minutes passed by between the two gods as they idly chatted about his injury and how it was being treated. Though the tone in the god of war's voice was pleasant to listen to and their topic polite, Dax could see that there was some sort of tension between this man and Dethos. He seemed more worried than maybe he was letting on. Reuniting with the god of war. Maybe they'd been close before Dethos had died. Maybe they had been close. The sense of awkwardness was growing among the stiff, formal conversation topics. He was talking to Dax the way you would talk to a stranger in the waiting room of a mental health clinic, formal to the point of pain and desperate not to cause the other person any more pain. Dax couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong with the other man's gaze. But how did I get this injured in the first place, and why was I chained to the bottom of a lake? Dax asked. Not only was he just personally interested in an answer to this question, he was curious why someone hadn't come in and told him already. Weren't you supposed to reorientate patients, especially ones that weren't awake when they were brought in? Thinking about that, how had he even got here? How had they even found or got to him in the first place? Where even had the cave been? The guy had kind of flinched when he'd asked how he was injured and looked like he really didn't want to be here. His lips kept opening and closing as if the words that he wanted to say were evaporating on them before they could be said. If he hadn't looked so pained, Dax probably would have laughed at how much he resembled a goldfish. But given the current mood, that felt callous. The large hands of the god of war brushed wrinkles out of the blanket that had covered Dax. That had covered Dax. Careful not to actually touch anything that was over his actual body while still tucking him in nicely. His eyes were also fixed on the blanket for some time before he seemed to make a decision to say something. Whatever it was he'd been waiting to say remained a mystery, though, as they were interrupted by the purple-robed person from earlier. Dax found himself cursing the person that he had spent so long hoping desperately would return. They had been standing in the doorway for some unknown amount of time. If they hadn't spoken, Dax didn't think he would have even noticed that they were there. You really don't remember? They asked, sounding concerned whilst pulling a thick notebook from a pocket and a pen from behind the ear. The room was filled with the sound of them scribbling notes down in the dog-eared book frantically. Dax thought that not remembering what happened would be worrying if he was the original Dethos. Whatever he had been through was obviously significant. Surely he could play off of how injured he was as a reason for not remembering, but he was an entirely different person and the memories weren't going to return. Maybe he should crack a joke about it to deflect. The system beeped loudly and showed him a yellow card on which the words, "Warning, you were almost OOC," were displayed. How were you meant to act in character as someone that you know basically nothing about, other than that they were a wheat god and a wheat byproducts god? Dax fished around in his brain for something to say that wouldn't set the system into kill mode. I nearly died, losing some memories around that. Doesn't really, I lost a lot of blood. I think that the memories might have been damaged by that, he rambled anxiously, silently pinching his own leg to ground himself. It hurt. It hurt more than he thought it would, and his eyes teared a little. His eyes teared. His eyes teared a little, adding to his helpless and pitiable appearance. Plus 50 points for a believable excuse, System added. +1 to cuteness. He felt terrible for manipulating these people, but gathering points made him feel at least a little accomplished today. He'd earned quite a few points. Hopefully these new upgrades will help him make this task before him a little easier. He felt a little bad for how much he'd complained to the system about its pricing, but not enough to apologise. Beneath here, Algaldi, he doesn't remember me. Purple Rob, you're sad about that. The author didn't even give me a name. Omdum, maybe that's for the best. This story has enough named characters as it is. Dax, I'm still here, guys. What's going on? Can you, answer at least one of my questions? Arthur. End of chapter 19. Everyone stretch. We're in. I feel like the last chapter for tonight. Shockingly, my voice isn't going, but my neck hurts like hell. I'm going to blame that on the cramp I got from my mitt. That's such a cute frog emote. It's very cute. We love a frog here. Pretty much all I've been doing in therapy is drawing frogs, and that the person who runs it was like, "You've got a very clear style, like very obvious style, haven't you?" Because I wasn't like, they give you prompts and stuff. Oh, the subtitles are insane because it's like you're too northern for me. I understand what you're saying. I feel like it makes it worse to have them on. I want to be inclusive for people who can't hear. I feel like it's truly insane. Truly, truly, truly. Herefordshire is truly voiced by Jack. But yeah, he gives he gives prompts and stuff, and then I'm like, I will do that, but I will also draw a frog. There will be a frog in it. Watercolor painting, it's about our emotions. Frog, acrylic painting. It's about things we fear. I'm just gonna draw Halloween. He's a photorealistic skull, and also a frog. To be fair, even YouTube captions don't understand what I'm saying. To be fair, in YouTube, I speak in a more northern accent because my brain is like, you must talk proper like when you're on on live. You can't talk like this when you're there and doing stuff and that because no one will be understanding you, hen. I truly have an incredibly weird accent. Like, when you have your phone and you're like Siri or like Google, it doesn't understand me. It's like, I have no idea what you're saying, hen. No, but have you seen there's an episode of a Scottish comedy where it's two Glaswegians stuck in a lift that's powered by speech, and they're like, "We're gonna die. We've got to speak in an English accent to get out." And they're like, we're too proud to be Scottishmen. They can't possibly be that. And then in the end, they're like, one of them does an English accent to get out, and it's like, fuck, it's racist against Scottish people. But truly, like, I don't think people who invent this stuff really envisage. Not everyone talks proper like around here, like that. It's truly not fair here either because uh we're like all mixed up accent wise. I was just gonna say exactly where, and that's not a good idea. If you're British, maybe you know. I don't know. I said when I was in Liverpool for uni, I was like, "Oh, where are you from?" And I was like, "I'm from here," and they were like, "Where's that?" I'm like, how dare you? I was like, "Do you know this football team?" And they're like, "They're shit." I'm like, "True." But also, I hate football. And if I was with a team, it wouldn't be that one. It would be like this Division 6 team. It's local. But that is factual that they are shit, but I don't care. You're not hurting me anyway. It's true, you've got two Premier League teams. Don't care. two Premier League, two Premier League teams, but uh, no mental health support. So sucks to be you, I guess. It was crazy that me lives in like an area with no money, goes to a big city because the mental health services would be so much better. Get that? There is not. Wild time. Be 2 seconds. I'm just gonna go find my original chair, and then we're gonna read episode 20. Chapter 20. Concerning memory loss. The weak god's memory loss was very worrying. It wasn't unheard of for a human to lose memories after a traumatic, almost fatal injury, but it was a phenomena that had yet to be observed among even the weakest of the gods, after doing several very extensive tests. Oh, Pluto joke got me, I'm sorry. Got me in two ways. One, it's funny. Two, it reminded me of a fanfic that has the name that is the numeric name that they gave Pluto when they threw it out of the planet category as a title, and it's so sad. Ugh. It's the sort of thing you read at 3 a.m. and 3 a.m. and you're like, why am I reading? It's so good, but it's hurting me so badly. That's what happens when you're a sucker for hurt comfort fix. But this was all hurt, no comfort. After doing several very extensive tests on Dethos, the team of healing deities in the halls of healing were gathering together to discuss his lack of memory. Gathering together like this would hopefully help them get to the root of the problem faster. They tested for every physical thing that could be wrong with him. None of the organs that stored his godly powers were damaged. And author's note. Personally, I like to keep my godlike powers in my magic pancreas. It's exactly like my non magical pancreas, only that it actually does its job. There's a type 2 diabetes joke for all of us. In fact, they were both working amazingly well considering how low his power level was right now. Despite this, though, the wounds that crisscrossed Dethos's body were still taking longer to heal than any of them would have predicted. They are. But then I feel like the second three Star Wars movies are kind of fanfic of the first three. And then all the Star Wars movies that have come out since are just fanfic of fanfic. But then, what can I say? I'm a Star Trek fan and not a Star Wars fan. And we can fight about Discovery in the chat there. Also, that one Star Wars movie, which I feel like is maybe the only one I've seen all the way through, where it's just like sand, conference on a different planet, conference, then a conference about a conference, and then more conferences, and then sand. Oh, and also incest. See, Picard is bad, but as a TNG, like, girly. I disgusted myself with that. As a TNG fan, like, just seeing everyone again, like, it's like my ability to forgive bad plots and bad writing. Uh, just seeing my Jean-Luc Picard and Data, because Data is like out of all of them, I was like, it's Data and Seven of Nine that I like relate to most. Sure, it's not Picard. Uh, Neither is that Data or Law, really. I feel like a lot of writers just hate the original content. Like, fuck it. I don't care that this has like a massive fandom and like trying to tap into that for money, 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 money. I'm just gonna ignore everything. If you like something, totally not happening. But then, we have Sherlock, the BBC version, where the writers actively hate the fan base. Uh, the bit where Sherlock quote unquote dies, and then everyone had it was like years in between when it came back, and everyone was like all these theories and stuff, and then there was like random theories and stuff. Like the writers just like wrote it to like say fuck you to all the fans on that one. I can't remember where I was going with this conversation. Ah, yeah. Data and Seven of Nine are the characters that I relate to the most. And then as a child, and then Shock of Shocks is autistic. Isn't it? Well, I was then, but no one knew till I was an adult. I feel like that was my first like, why do I why do I love robots so much and androids and people who have like uh implants and don't understand human interaction as much? It's like, God, I love oh my god, Spock. My brain just deleted Spock from my brain for a second. God, I love Spock. Like alien culture where it's like feelings. Yeah, we only do them every 7 years. We just do them internally, so we just pull them into our internal self so deep that every 7 years we have to have a breakdown. And then Discovery, absolutely hate the way they deal with Klingons. truly. Ugh. And then what did I watch recently? Where I was like, truly, no idea. I watched a show and using my brain just goes bloop, delete, goodbye. And I see one thing of it, and I'm like, oh, the entire story just comes in your brain. That happened to me a day with Tale of the Nine Tails, which is a Korean drama about nine-tailed foxes and uh, a lot of stuff. And I was just like, oh, the story, the feels, the story, the feel. And NCIS, there's a channel if you have like cable in the UK. There's a channel that just plays NCIS. Yes, I. You go down deep in those channels no one watches. Uh, truly just plays NCIS. Like every time I open it and I look, it's like NCIS, CSI, CSI Miami. Uh, which is the show that has, is it CSI that has Special Victims Unit? SVU? It just shows that. It's up there with the channel that just replays 1980s adaptations of Agatha Christie novels and 70s versions of Sherlock Holmes, which from ITV, which to be fair are one of the best adaptations. Unfortunately, the actor that played uh, Sherlock died before they could bring back another season, which is very sad. Law and Order, yeah, Law and Order SV. I don't know, they all just meld into the same thing for me. The sort of show that my grandma would watch and just be like, I don't understand what these Americans are saying. Everything on TV these days is just American, and I can't understand a word they say. It's not on TV these days. Saturday used to be a good day for TV, but there's no on anymore. Truly, though, she doesn't. The longer Dethos stayed in the healing halls, the higher their concern about his memory loss grew. At one point, they had even resorted to doing a sort of identity parade to determine the severity of the memory loss. It had consisted of pretty much every henny, yes, every henny building, not heavenly being, that had ever interacted with Dethos, that was still alive, visiting him in the healing halls. That plan of action, however, was to no avail. He didn't even recognize Elgaldia, the god of war. If there was anyone that he should remember, it should have been Elgaldia. The physical form of the god of war currently took. The physically. Can you tell it's near the end of stream? The physical form the god of war currently took was different than it had been the night Dethos almost died, but the change in his physical manifestation shouldn't be enough to make him unidentifiable. All the important, noticeable features were still there. He'd just gotten significantly bigger in stature. A lot of people hadn't been happy with the decision to include the god of war in this little experiment, but if Dethos couldn't even remember him, then his memory loss was more extensive than they worried. I think it might be psychological, personally, Omdum suggested. It makes sense considering how traumatic the events that got him here were. The battle was horrible for all that were there, and Dethos's wounds were so severe it's a miracle that he survived. It wasn't inconceivable that this is what had happened to Dethos. The traumatic situation changed you. Maybe this time they had changed his memories to keep him. Maybe this time they had changed his memories to keep him alive. Remembering the battle was something many who had fought in it wished they could no longer do. It haunted them in the quiet moments of their days. Omdom was used to seeing them here in the healing halls, usually at night, desperately looking for something to take the memories away. He couldn't take them, but he could help them cope with them better and stop them from becoming overwhelmed. Dethos' situation was the exact opposite. He was a god who had experienced one of the worst things that could happen to a deity, and yet he had no memory of it. How did you approach a situation like that? The wounds were worse than they are now? A junior asked, horrified. They were holding the god of wheat's medical charts, across which were documented the multiple wounds his manifestation was riddled with. The chart looked more like a guide to scoring a festival ham than an actual medical record. The wounds you see now were nothing in comparison. The god of healing shuddered at the memory. Killing a god through wounds to their manifested body is almost impossible. So just imagine the scene I walked into, a fresh-eyed god of battlefield medicine. It was only the healing spring that could have healed him. We barely even managed to keep him alive long enough to get him there in the first place. It really had been something miraculous, a wonder. He could still remember the blood dripping through his hands as the other healing deities thrust the body of Dethos into his shaking arms and screamed at him to run. Many deities across both realms had lost a physical manifestation that day. Many were greatly wounded or forced to spend years regaining their former strength. The former god of war had died, yes, but after suffering wounds even greater than that of Dethos over the course of the entire war. Years of bleeding and followers that had begun to doubt his ability to defeat the demon realm had led to a horrifying death. The god of wheat had stood with one foot in the halls of the dead and the other in the land of the living, edging ever further away from them. Omdum had never seen anyone get so close to death, but not die before. In his forced restrainment in the lake of healing, Dethos had also lost his following, and that was something that had killed many deities on its own throughout history. Here he was alive, a god without any believers. If the lake was supposed to heal him completely, hasn't he woken up too early? A tired senior healer asked. She was holding several medical texts in her arms and tiredly leaning against the wall of Omdum's office as she flicked through them, looking for answers. Yes, 4,000 years may seem long, but this was definitely too early to be waking, Omdum replied equally as tiredly. He may no longer need to sleep, but that didn't mean reading ancient medical tomes was something he found exhilarating. The ancient deities that had come before him had notoriously bad handwriting. It really was puzzling him why Dethos had awoken so early, when he had been placed there within the healing waters of the spring. They had calculated that it would probably take 6,000 years to heal his manifested body, well for it to heal enough for Dethos to be strong enough to heal the rest of it on his own. The body he was using now was nowhere near the level of healing that they would have predicted him to be at this point either. Something had delayed the healing, something had awoken him, and something had let him free from the restraining chains that should still be holding the small god down there. And yet every day that he was lying there, unable to fulfill prayers, the same female senior member of staff started to say this before she was interrupted by her boss. I understand everyone's concerns, but you must remember that we put Dethos in there to stop him dying. Yes, being there might well have killed him too. Human memory is only so long, but it was a risk we had to take. It might seem to the less experienced healing deities that the choice he had made was to let a god die or just prolong his death, but he had taken the one with the most hope for a good outcome. Even the strongest of deities can fade away from the memory of even their fellow colleagues, a junior added, with a sad look upon their face as they folded bandages carefully into tight rolls in the corner of their room. Everyone sighed. The more that they tried to probe the situation, the more convoluted it seemed to become. Plans were made to brew a memory potion. Memory potion. For Dethos from the sacred herbs, only found in the gardens cared for by Mother Willow, and to ask the goddess of memory to come if the potion had no effect. Hopefully, now that Dethos was fully conscious and settling back into a safe environment with familiar objects and people, his memory would return on its own. They would be there to support him through it, as much as they all wanted. As much as they all wanted Dethos to regain his memories, it wouldn't be only the good ones coming back. It would be best to slowly introduce him into the events of the past. If there is no sign of improvement, he shouldn't have to find out what happened from idly gossiping deities with no understanding of the distress that it could cause, Omdum added. He was worried that hearing the wrong information from the wrong people could set everything back. Dethos didn't need to find out everything in one go. It would be too much. They didn't need the situation to get any worse than it already was right now. Omdum, the god of healing, dismissed them all, before turning to Elgaldir, who had been standing in the corner the entire meeting, worrying the corner of a handkerchief slightly. silently. You took note of the deep wrinkles crinkled into the god of war's forehead. It's not your fault, he said, laying his hand gently on the highest part of Elgaldia's arm he could comfortably reach. Elgaldia sighed a sigh only the bone-weary could muster. Minithia, Omdum, nervously looking over at a brooding god of war. Senior healer, should he be here? Omdum, ignore our friend in the corner. Senior healer, it's kind of hard to. Elgaldia, surrounded by an ominous aura. Don't mind me. Junior, but what about patient confidentiality? Arthur, what a good question. Does the Heavenly Realm even have their own version of the Data Protection Act? With the amount of gossiping these deities can get up to, I highly doubt it. And for anyone else out there doesn't know what the Data Protection Act is, it's basically kind of HIPAA, but about all of your data across every industry. Like, it's just a protection of identifying information and uh, personalized information. And that is the end of chapter 20. Just so you know, the next chapter is called Fever Dream. Oh, we're not reading it tonight because I will fall asleep in the middle of it. And my voice is starting to go. But thank you for coming today. Thank you for being here. Look at my cool bird that I made. Sometimes he's small bird, sometimes he's big bird. Put him right there. It's a pigeon. I have a parrot one. Let me see. I might swap it just so you can have a look at what we got in. Yeah, cool parrot version. I'm glad you could make it too. I will read the rest next Wednesday at the same time. Tomorrow morning my time, there is a stream from. Oh, I keep headbutting. You think a massive glowing thing would like make it less likely for me to hit my head on it, but no. Tomorrow, 9 till 11 in the morning my time. I don't know what that is anywhere else, but like I think that's like 2 a.m. in the US. I'm gonna be doing crafts before going out of therapy, and then Friday is 7 to 9 my time. That's 2 p.m. 4 p.m. EST, and I will see you. Let's skip that. I'll see you then, and we will be playing Stardew because I figured out how to fish. And even though it's still hell, it's better than it was before. You knew you had to left click. I'm not actually stupid enough not to know that. It's just when you play on PS4 and then start playing on PC, your brain is just like hot wired to what like the things are on your controller, and your brain is like, oh, what could this be? Press every button. I've been playing it on my own in a different save file, and I got to summer of the first year, and it'd be going good. And it's like, oh, this is why I like this game. The only reason I wasn't playing it is because it was on PS4, and the controller is like a brick, so heavy. My little hands. My little pastry hands can't hold it up, and it like destroys my thumbs every time I use. So this is where we say goodbye, and don't be dangerous out there. Wash those little handies. Don't run with scissors. Uh, make good choices if you can. Uh, if you can't, try to do something not heinous. Try to make the world a little bit of a better place. And I'll see you tomorrow if I don't sleep Thursdays. I still feel not right. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.